Part 2 of Back to the Stone Age by Edgar Rice Burroughs. 8. The Forest of Death. Dangar looked at Von Horst with surprise as the latter announced that he was going with Laja. Why? He asked. Von Horst shook his head. I do not know, he replied. I have one excellent reason, and that is that I could not see a girl go alone through this savage country, into that beastly-looking forest, but I know that there is something else, much deeper, that impels me, something as inexplicable and inescapable as instinct. I will come with you, said Dangar. Von Horst shook his head. No. Go on to Sari. If I live, I'll follow you later. You could never find Sari. With your help, I can. How can I help you if I am not with you? Demanded Dangar. You can blaze the trail. Put marks on trees. Place stones upon the ground, like this, showing the direction you are going. He placed some stones in a row pointing in the direction they had been going, forming an arrow. Mostly you follow animal trails, so you will have only to indicate the places that you branch off from the main trails. If you will do these things, I can follow you. I shall blaze my trail from here to wherever I go, so that I can find my way back. I do not like to leave you, said Dangar. It is best, replied Von Horst. There is a girl waiting for you in Sari. There is no one waiting for me anywhere. We do not know how far it is to Laja's country. We might never reach it, we might never return if we did. It is best that you go on to Sari. Very well, said Dangar. I shall be expecting you there. Goodbye. He turned and started off down the little valley. Von Horst watched him for a moment, thinking of the strange circumstances that had brought them together across 500,000 years, thinking also of the even more remarkable fact that they had found so much in common upon which to build an enduring friendship. He sighed and turned in the direction that Laja had gone. The girl was halfway to the forest, swinging along easily with her chin up and never looking back. She looked so little against the background of that mighty forest, and so brave. Something very much like tears momentarily dimmed the man's eyes as he watched her, then he set out after her. Something of what he was doing he realized, but not all. He knew that it was quite likely that he was following the girl into an untracked wilderness from which neither of them would ever emerge, and that he was cutting himself off, doubtlessly forever, from his only friend in all this savage world, from the chance to go to a country where he might live in comparative security and make new friends, and all this for a girl who shunned and snubbed him. But what he did not know was that Jason Gridley would eventually decide to remain in the inner world, when the rest of the expedition sailed for the North Polar opening and the outer crust, and proceed to Sari, there to form an expedition to search for him. He did not know that he was quite probably throwing away this one chance for succor, but if he had known it, there is little likelihood that it would have altered his decision. He overtook Laja just at the edge of the forest. She had heard his footsteps behind her and had turned to see who or what was following her. She did not seem greatly surprised. In fact, it seemed to Von Horst that nothing could surprise Laja. What do you want? She inquired. I am going with you to Lohar, he replied. The warriors of Lohar will probably kill you when you get there, she prophesied cheerfully. I am going with you just the same, insisted Von Horst. I did not ask you to come. You had better go back and go to Sari with Dangar. Listen torstaime, lawantaya. Hebegid. I cannot let you go alone, knowing the dangers you may have to face, wild beasts and savage men. I must go with you as long as there is no one else to go, so why can't we be friends? Why do you dislike me so? What have I done? If you come with me it will have to be as though we were friends, just friends, whether we are friends or not, she replied, ignoring his last two queries. Do you understand that, just as friends? I understand, he said. Have I ever asked more of you? No, she rather snapped the word. Nor shall I. My only thought is for your safety. When you are among your own people, I shall leave you. If they don't kill you before you can escape, she reminded him. Why should they wish to kill me? He demanded. You are a stranger, and we always kill strangers, so that they will not kill us, or nearly always. Sometimes, if we have reason to like them very much we let them live, but Gaz will not like you. He will kill you if the others don't. Who is Gaz? Why should he wish to kill me? Gaz is a great warrior, a mighty hunter. Single-handed he has killed a Ryth. I am not a Ryth, so I still don't see why he should wish to kill me, insisted Von Horst. He will not like it when he learns that we have been together for so many sleeps. He is a very jealous man. What is he to you? Demanded Von Horst. He hoped to mate with me before I was captured by the Bastion. If he has not taken another mate, he will still wish to. Gaz has a very quick temper and a very bad one. He has killed many men. Often he kills them first and then inquires about them later. Thus has he killed many men whom he would not have killed had he taken the time to discover that they had not harmed him. Do you wish to mate with him? Asked Von Horst. She shrugged her shapely shoulders. I must mate with someone, for I must bear sons that Lohar may have a chief when my father dies, and Laja would mate only with a mighty man. Gaz is a mighty man. I asked you if you wish to mate with him, do you love him, Laja? I do not love anyone, she replied, and, furthermore, it is none of your affair. You are always meddling and asking questions that do not concern you. Come, if you are coming with me. We cannot get to Lohar by standing still talking nonsense. You will have to lead the way, he said. I do not know where Lohar lies. They started on. Where is your country, she asked. Perhaps it lies beyond Lohar in the same direction. That would be fine for you, provided, of course, that you got out of Lohar alive. I do not know where my country is, he admitted. She knitted her brows and looked at him in astonishment. You mean that you could not find your way home, she demanded. Just that. I wouldn't have the faintest idea even in which direction to start. How strange, she commented. I have never heard of any so stupid as that, other than the poor creatures whose heads are sick. They know nothing at all. I have seen a few such. They get that way from blows on the head. Once a boy I knew fell out of a tree and landed on his head. He was never right again. He used to think he was a tarag and go roaring and growling about on his hands and knees, but one day his father got tired of listening to him and killed him. Do you think I am like that boy? Asked von Horst. I have never seen you act like a tarag, she admitted, but you do have very peculiar ways, and in many things you are very stupid. Von Horst could not repress a smile, and the girl saw him. She appeared nettled. Do you think it anything to laugh about? She demanded. Say, what are you doing? Why do you chop at so many trees with your knife? That is enough to make one think that there may be something the matter with your head. I am marking the trail that we pass, he explained, so that I can find my way back after I leave you. She seemed very interested. Perhaps your head is not so sick after all, she said. Even my father never thought of anything like that. He wouldn't have to if he can find his way about as easily as you Pellucidarians can, von Horst reminded her. Oh, it is not always so easy to find our way any place except to our own countries, she explained. Take us anywhere in Pellucidar and we can find our way home, but we might not be able to find our way back again to the place we had been taken. With your method, we could. I shall have to tell this to my father. As they penetrated more deeply into the forest, von Horst was impressed by its strangely somber and gloomy atmosphere. The dense foliage of the tree tops formed an unbroken roof above their heads, shutting out all direct rays of the sun. The result was a perpetual twilight, with a temperature considerably lower than any he had experienced in the open, the two combining to retard the growth of underbrush, so that the ground between the boles of the trees was almost bare of anything other than a carpet of dead leaves. What few plants had had the hardihood to withstand these conditions were almost colorless, unhealthy, grotesque-appearing forms that but added to the melancholy aspect of the repellent wood. From the moment that they entered the forest the ground rose rapidly until they were climbing a very considerable ascent, then they suddenly topped a ridge and descended into a ravine, but the forest continued unbroken as far as they could see. As Laja crossed the ravine and started up the farther ascent, von Horst asked her why she didn't try to find an easier way by following the ravine down until they reached the end of the hills. I am following a straight line to Lohar, she replied. But suppose you came to a sea, he asked. I would go around it, of course, she replied, but where I can go at all, I go in a straight line. I hope there are no Alps on our route, he remarked, half aloud. I do not know what Alps are, said Laja, but there will be plenty of other animals. There will have to be more animals than we have seen since we got into this wood, remarked von Horst, if we are to eat. I haven't seen even so much as a bird. I have noticed that, replied Laja. I have also noticed that there are no fruits or nuts, nor any other edible thing. I do not like this forest. Perhaps it is the forest of death. What is the forest of death? I have heard of it. My people speak of it. It lies down some distance from Lohar. In it live a race of horrible people who are not like any other people. Perhaps this is it. Well, we haven't seen anything so far that could harm us, von Horst reassured her. They had climbed out of the ravine and were on more level ground. The forest seemed even denser than it had been farther back. Only a dim, diffused light relieved the darkness. Suden lulawantaya stopped. What was that? She asked in a whisper. Did you see it? I saw something move, but I did not see what it was, replied the man. It disappeared among the trees ahead of us and to the right. Is that what you saw? Yes. It was right over there. She pointed. I do not like this forest. I do not know why, but it is as though it were vile, unclean. Von Horst nodded. It is eerie. I shall be glad when we are well out of it. Där, exclaimed Lawantaya. There it is again. It is all white. What could it be? I don't know. I just had the briefest glimpse of it, but I thought, I thought it was something almost human. It is so dark in here that it is difficult to discern objects clearly unless one is very close to them. They walked on in silence, keeping a sharp lookout in all directions, and von Horst noticed that the girl remained very close to him. Often her shoulder touched his breast as though she sought the reassurance of personal contact. He was doubly glad now that he had insisted upon coming with her. He knew that she would not admit that she was frightened, and he would not suggest it, but he knew that she was frightened. For some inexplicable reason, inexplicable to him, he was glad that she was. Perhaps it satisfied the protective instinct in him. Perhaps it made her seem more feminine, and von Horst liked feminine women. They had gone some little distance from the point at which they had seen the mysterious creature moving among the trees, without seeing any other suggestion of life in the forest, when they were startled by a series of shrieks, mingled with which were roars and a strange hissing sound. They both stopped, and Lajah pressed close to von Horst. He felt her tremble ever so slightly, and threw an arm about her, reassuringly. The sounds were coming rapidly closer. The screams, sounding strangely human, were filled with terror and despair, rising to a piercing crescendo of fright. Then the author of them burst into view, a naked man, his face distorted by terror. And such a man! His skin was a dead white, without life or beauty, and his hair was white. Two great canine tusks curved downward to his chin, the pink irises of his eyes surrounded blood-red pupils to make an already repellent countenance still further hideous. Behind him, hissing and roaring, galloped a small dinosaur. It was not much larger than a Shetland pony, but its appearance might easily have caused even the bravest of men misgivings, so similar was it in everything but size to the mighty Tyrannosaurus rex, the king of the tyrant reptiles of the Cretaceous. At sight of Lajah and von Horst, the dinosaur veered suddenly in their direction and came hissing and roaring down upon them like a steam locomotive gone amok. So close was it that there was not even time to seek safety behind a tree, and von Horst's reaction was the natural and almost mechanical one of a man of his training. He whipped his revolver from its holster and fired, then he leaped quickly out of the path of the charging brute, dragging Lajah with him. The dinosaur, badly hit, roared with rage, nearly going down. As it stumbled past him, the man fired again, placing a heavy .45 slug just behind the left shoulder. This time the beast fell, but knowing the remarkable life tenacity of the reptilia, von Horst was not overconfident that all danger was past. Grasping Lajah by a hand, he ran quickly to the nearest tree, behind the bole of which they sought concealment. Above them and out of reach were the lowest branches, a perfect sanctuary that they could not gain. If the two bullets had not permanently stopped the dinosaur, their principal hope lay in the possibility that after it regained its feet, if it did not immediately see them it would go blundering off in the wrong direction. From behind the tree, von Horst watched the beast pawing up the matted vegetation as it sought to regain its feet. He could see that it was far from dead, although badly hit. Lajah pressed close to him. He could feel her heart beating against his side. It was a tense moment as the dinosaur finally staggered up. For a moment it swayed as though about to fall again. Then it swung slowly about in a circle, its muzzle raised, sniffing the air. Presently it started in their direction, slowly, cautiously. Its appearance now seemed far more menacing to von Horst than had its mad charge. It gave the impression of being a cold, calculating, efficient engine of destruction, an animated instrument of revenge that would demand an eye for an eye and not give up the ghost until vengeance had been achieved. It was coming straight toward the tree behind which they were hiding. Whether it had discovered the small portion of von Horst's head that was revealed beyond the edge of the bowl, the man did not know, but it was certainly coming toward them guided either by sight or by scent. It was a tense moment for von Horst. For the instant he was uncertain as to what he should do. Then he decided. Leaning close to Lajah, he whispered, "The beast is coming. Run for that tree behind us, keeping this tree between you and the beast, so that it does not see you, then keep going from one tree to another until you are safely away. When it is dead I will call to you." "And what will you do? Will you come with me?" "I'll wait here to make sure that it dies," he replied. "I can give it a few more shots if necessary." She shook her head. "No. Hurry," he urged. "It is quite close. It is looking for us." "I shall remain here with you," said Lajah with finality. From her tone of voice he knew that there was nothing more to be said. From past experience he knew his Lajah. With a shrug, he gave up the argument, then he looked out once more to see the dinosaur within a few paces of the tree. Suddenly he leaped from behind the tree and started on a run across the front of the beast. He had acted so quickly that Lajah was stunned to inaction by surprise. But not the dinosaur. It did just what von Horst had hoped and believed it would. With a bellow of rage, it took after him. Thus he drew it away from the girl. This accomplished, he turned and faced the brute. Standing his ground, he fired rapidly from his automatic, placing his bullets in the broad chest. Yet the thing came on. Von Horst emptied his weapon. The dinosaur was almost upon him. He saw Laja running rapidly toward him, as though in an effort to divert the charge of the infuriated reptile with the comparatively puny spear that she carried. He tried to leap aside from the path of the charging beast, but it was too close. It rose upon its hind feet and struck at his head with a taloned forepaw, felling him, unconscious, to the ground. 9. The charnel caves. Von Horst experienced a sensation of peace and well-being. He was vaguely aware that he was awakening from a long and refreshing sleep. He did not open his eyes. He was so comfortable that there seemed no reason to do so, but rather to court a continuance of the carefree bliss he was enjoying. This passive rapture was rudely interrupted by a growing realization that his head ached. With returning consciousness, his nervous system awoke to the fact that he was far from comfortable. The sensation of peace and well-being faded as the dream it was. He opened his eyes and looked up into the face of Laja, bending solicitously close above his own. His head was pillowed in her lap. She was stroking his forehead with a soft palm. "You are all right, Von," she whispered. "You will not die?" He smiled up at her, wryly. "Oh death! Where is thy sting?" he apostrophized. "It didn't sting you," Laja assured him, "it hit you with its paw." Von Horst grinned. "My head feels as though it had hit me with a sledgehammer." "Where is it? What became of it?" He turned his head painfully to one side and saw the dinosaur laying motionless near them. "It died just as it struck you," explained the girl. "You are a very brave man, Von." "You are a very brave girl," he retorted. "I saw you running in to help me. You should not have done that. Could I have stood and watched you being killed when you had deliberately drawn the charge of the Xerath upon yourself to save me? So that is a Xerath?" "Yes, a baby Xerath," replied the girl. "It is well for us that it was not a full-grown one, but of course one would never meet a full-grown Xerath in a forest." "No? Why not?" "For one reason, they are too big, and, then, they couldn't find any food here. A full-grown Xerath is 8 times as long as a man is tall. It couldn't move around easily among all these trees, and when it stood up on its hind feet, it'd bump its head on the branches. They kill thags and tanders and other large game that seldom enters the forests, at least not forests like this one." Von Horst whistled softly to himself as he tried to visualize a reptile nearly 50 feet in length that fed on the great boss, the progenitors of modern cattle, and upon the giant mammoth. "Yes," he soliloquized, "I imagine it's just as well that we ran into Junior instead of Papa. But, say, Laja, what became of that man-thing the Xerath was chasing? He never stopped running. I saw him looking back after you made the loud noise with that thing you call pistol, but he did not stop. He should have come back to help you, I think, though he must have thought that you were sick in the head not to run. It takes a very brave man not to run from a Xerath. There wasn't any place to run. If there had been, I'd still be running." "I do not believe that," said Laja. "Gaz would have run, but not you." "You like me a little better, Laja?" he asked. He was starved for friendship, for even the friendship of this savage little girl of the Stone Age. "No, Said Laya, emphatically. I do not like you at all, but I know a brave man when I see one." "Why don't you like me, Laja?" he asked a little wistfully. "I like you. I like you a lot." He hesitated. How much did he like her? "I don't like you because you are sick in the head, for one thing. For another, you are not of my tribe. Furthermore, you try to order me around as though I belonged to you." "I'm sure sick in the head now," he admitted, "but that doesn't affect my good disposition or my other sterling qualities, and I can't help not being a member of your tribe. You can't hold that against me. It was just a mistake on the part of my father and mother in not having been born in Pellucidar, and really you can't blame them for that, especially when you consider that they never even heard of the place. And, Laja, as for ordering you around, I never do it except for your own good. And I don't like the way you talk sometimes, with a silent laugh behind your words. I know that you are laughing at me, making fun of me because you think that the world you came from is so much better than Pellucidar, that its people have more brains. Don't you think that you will ever learn to like me?" he asked, quite solemn now. "No," she said, "you will be dead before I could have time." "Gaz, I suppose, will attend to that?" he inquired. "Gaz, or some other of my people. Do you think you could stand now?" "I am very comfortable," he said. "I have never had such a nice pillow." She took his head, quite gently, and laid it on the ground, then she stood up. "You are always laughing at me with words," she said. He rose to his feet. "With you, Laja, never at you," he said. She looked at him steadily as though meditating his words. She was attempting, he was sure, to conjure some uncomplimentary double meaning from them, but she made no comment. "Do you think you can walk?" was all that she said. "I don't feel much like dancing even a saraband," he replied, "but I think I can walk all right." Come on, lead the way to Lohar and the lightsome gas. They resumed their journey deeper into the gloomy wood, speaking seldom as they toiled up the steep ascents that constantly confronted them. At length they came to a sheer cliff that definitely blocked their further progress in a straight line. Lajah turned to the left and followed along its foot. As she did not hesitate or seem in the slightest doubt, Von Horst asked her why she turned to the left instead of to the right. Do you know the shortest way when you cannot go in a straight line? He asked. No, she admitted, but when one does not know and cannot follow one's head, then one should always turn to the left and follow one's heart. He nodded, comprehendingly. Not a bad idea, he said. At least it saves one from useless speculation. He glanced up the face of the cliff, casually measuring its height with his eyes. He saw the same great trees of the forest growing close to the edge, indicating that the forest continued on beyond, and he saw something else, just a fleeting glimpse of something moving, but he was sure that he recognized it. We are being watched, he said. Lawantaya glanced up. You saw something? She asked. He nodded. It looked like our white-haired friend, or another just like him. He was not our friend, remonstrated the literal Lajah. I was laughing with words, as you say, he explained. I wish that I liked you, said Lajah. He looked at her in surprise. I wish that you did, but why do you wish it? I would like to like a man who can laugh in the face of danger, she replied. Well, please try, but do you really think that fellow is dangerous? He didn't look very dangerous when we saw him presenting the freedom of the forest to the Zareth. She knit her brows and looked at him with a puzzled expression. Sometimes you seem quite like other people, she said, and then you say something, and I realize that your head is very sick. Von Horst laukit alut. I opine that the 20th century brand of humor doesn't go so well in the Pleistocene. There you go again, she snapped. Even my father, who is very wise, would not know what you were talking about half the time. As they moved along the foot of the cliff, they kept constantly alert for any further sign that they were being watched or followed. What makes you think that this white-haired man is dangerous? He asked. He alone might not be dangerous to us, but where there is one there must be a tribe, and any tribe of strange people would be dangerous to us. We are in their country. They know the places where they might most easily set upon us and kill us. We do not know what is just beyond the range of our vision. If this is the forest of death, the people who dwell here are dangerous because they are not as other men. I have heard it said. None of my people who are living has ever been here, but stories handed down from father to son tell of strange things that have happened in the forest of death. My people are brave people, but none of them would go to that forest. There are things in Pellucidar that warriors cannot fight with weapons. It is known that there are such things in the forest of death. If we are indeed in it, we shall never live to reach Lohar. Poor Gats, exclaimed von Horst. What do you mean? I am sorry for him because he will not have the pleasure of killing me or taking you for his mate. She looked at him in disgust, continuing on in silence. They both watched for signs of the trailers they were sure were following them, but no sound broke the deathly silence of the wood, nor did they see aught to confirm their suspicions, so at length they decided that whatever it was they had seen at the cliff top had departed and would not molest them. They came to the mouth of a cave in the cliff, and as they had not slept for some time, von Horst suggested that they go in and rest. His head still ached, and he felt the need of sleep. The mouth of the cave was quite small, making it necessary for von Horst to get down on his hands and knees and crawl in to investigate. He shoved his spear in ahead of him and felt around with it to assure himself that no animal was layering in the darkness of the interior, as well as to discover if the cave were large enough to accommodate them. Having satisfied himself on both these points, he entered the cave, and a moment later Lajah joined him. A cursory exploration assured them that the cave ran back same little distance into the cliff, but as they were only interested in enough space wherein to sleep, they lay down close to the entrance. Von Horst lay with his head to the opening, his spear ready to thrust at any intruder that might awaken him. Lajah lay a few feet from him farther back in the cave. It was very dark and quiet. A gentle draught of fresh air came through the entrance, dispelling the damp and musty odors which von Horst had come to expect in caves. Soon they were asleep. When von Horst awoke, his head no longer ached, and he felt much refreshed. He turned over on his back and stretched, yawning. You are awake? Asked Lajah. Yes. Are you rested? Entirely. I just woke up. Hungry? Yes, and thirsty, too, she admitted. Let's get started, then, he suggested. It looks as though we'd have to get out of this forest before we find food. All right, she said, but what makes it so dark out? Von Horst got to his knees and faced the entrance to the cave. He could see nothing. Even the gloom of the forest had been blotted out. He thought it possible that he had become turned around in his sleep and was looking in the wrong direction, but no matter which way he turned he was confronted always by the same impenetrable blackness. Then he crawled forward, feeling with his hands. Where he had thought the entrance to be, he found the rounded surface of a large boulder. He felt around its edges, discovering loose dirt. "The entrance has been blocked up, Laja," he said. "But what could have done it without awakening us?" she demanded. "I don't know," he admitted, "but in some way the mouth of the cave has been filled with a boulder and loose dirt. There isn't a breath of air coming in as there was when we entered." He tried to push the boulder away, but he could not budge it. Then he started to scrape away the loose dirt, but what he scraped away was replaced by more sifting in from the outside. Laja came to his side and they exerted their combined weight and strength in an effort to move the boulder, but to no avail. "We are penned up here like rats in a trap," said Von Horst in deep disgust. "And with our air supply shut off we'll suffocate if we don't find some way to get out." "There must be another opening," said Von Horst. "What makes you think so?" asked the girl. "Don't you recall that when we came in there was a draft of air entering from the outside?" he asked. "Yes, that's right, there was." "Well, if the air came in this entrance in a draft, it must have gone out some other opening, and if we can find that opening, perhaps we can get out, too." "Do you suppose the white-haired man and his people blocked the entrance?" asked Laja. "I imagine so," replied Von Horst. "It must have been men of some kind. No animal could have done it so quietly as not to have awakened us, and, of course, for the same reason, an earthquake is out of the question." "I wonder why they did it," mused the girl. "Probably an easy and safe way to kill strangers who come to their country," suggested Von Horst. "Just let us starve to death or suffocate," said the girl in disgust. "Only cowards would do that." "I'll bet Gaz would never do anything like that," said Von Horst. "Gaz? He has killed many men with his bare hands. Sometimes he bites the great vein in their neck and they bleed to death, and once he pushed a man's head back until he broke his neck. What a nice little playfellow. Gaz never plays. He loves to kill, that is his play. Well, if I'm going to meet him, I'll have to get out of here. Let's follow the cave back and see if we can find the other opening. Stay close behind me." Von Horst rose slowly to gauge the height of the cave and found that they could stand erect, then he groped his way cautiously toward the rear, touching a wall with one hand. He moved very slowly, feeling ahead with each foot for solid ground before he planted it. They had not gone far when Von Horst felt what appeared to be twigs and leaves beneath his feet. He stooped and felt of them. They were dry branches with dead leaves still clinging to them and long thick grasses. The floor of the cave here was strewn thickly with them. "Must have been a sleeping place for some animal or perhaps for men," he suggested. "I wish we had a light, I don't like groping along in the dark like this." "I have my fire stones," said Laja. "If we had some tinder, I could light a bundle of these grasses." "I'll make some," said Von Horst. He stooped and cleared a place on the floor, exposing the bare ground. Then he gathered some of the dried leaves and powdered them between his palms, making a little pile of the tinder on the bare ground. "Come and try it, now," he said. Here, he guided her hand to the tinder. Laja knelt beside him and struck her fire stones together close above the little single fragment, and it commenced to glow. Laja bent low and blew gently upon it. Suddenly it burst into flame. Von Horst was ready with a bundle of the grasses he had gathered for the purpose, and a moment later he held a blazing torch in his hand. In the light of the torch they looked about them. They were in a large chamber formed by the widening of the cave. The floor was littered with twigs and grasses among which were a number of gnawed bones. Whether it was the den of beasts or men, Von Horst could not tell, but from the presence of the bedding he judged that it was the latter. Yet there was no article of cast-off clothing, no broken or discarded weapon or tool that he could find, no potsherds. If men had dwelt here they must have been of a very low order. Before their torch burned low they gathered grasses and made a quantity of them, and thus supplied with the assurance of light for a considerable time they continued on through the large chamber into a narrow corridor that wound and twisted into the heart of the escarpment. Presently they came to another even larger chamber. This, too, bore evidence of having been inhabited, but the relics here were of a grisly nature. The floor was strewn with the bones and skulls of human beings. A foul odor of decaying flesh permeated the air of this subterranean charnel chamber. "Let's get out of here," said Von Horst. "There are 3 openings beside the one we came in," said Laja. "Which one shall we take?" Von Horst shook his head. "We may have to try them all," he said. "Let's start with the one farthest on our right. It may be as good a guess as any, and at best it's only a guess, no matter which one we decide on." As they approached the opening they were almost overpowered by the stench that came from it, but Von Horst was determined to investigate every possible avenue of escape, so he stepped through the opening into a smaller chamber. The sight that met his eyes brought him to a sudden halt. A dozen human corpses were piled against the far wall of the chamber. A single glance showed Von Horst that there was no outer opening leading from the room, so he beat a hasty retreat. One of the two remaining openings from the large chamber was smoke-blackened, and on the floor of the cave just in front of it were the ashes and charcoal of many wood fires. Its appearance gave von Horst an idea. He walked to the second opening and held his smoking torch close to it, but the smoke rose steadily. Then he went to that before which fires had been built, and now the smoke from his torch was drawn steadily into the opening. "This one must lead to the outer opening," he said, "and it also served as a chimney when they cooked their feasts. Nice lot, whoever they are that inhabit these caves. I think I prefer gas. We'll try this one, Laja." A narrow corridor rose steeply. It was blackened with soot, and the draft that wafted continually up it was laden with the stench from the horror chambers below. "It can't be far to the top," said von Horst. "The cliff didn't look more than 50 feet high, and we have been climbing a little all the time since we first entered the cave." "It's getting light ahead," said Laja. "Yes, there's the opening," exclaimed von Horst. 10 feet from the surface they passed the openings to 2 corridors or chambers, one on either side of the shaft they were ascending, but so engrossed were they in escaping from the foul air that surrounded them that they scarce noticed them. Nor did they see the forms lurking in the darkness just within. Laja was just behint von Horst. It was she who discovered the danger first, but too late. She saw hands reach out of one of the openings just as von Horst passed it, seize him, and drag him in. She voiced a cry of warning, and at the same instant she was seized and drawn into the opening on the opposite side. 10 Gorbuses. Von Horst struggled and fought to free himself. He shouted aloud to Laja to run to the opening they had seen ahead of them and make her escape. He did not know that she, too, had been captured. It seemed that a dozen hands clung to each of his arms, and though he was a powerful man he could neither escape nor wrench his arm free long enough to draw his pistol. His spear had been snatched from him at the moment of his seizure. It was very dark in the corridor down which he was being dragged along a steep declivity, so that he could not see whether they were men or beasts that had captured him. Yet, though they did not speak, he was sure that they were men. Presently, at a sudden turning of the corridor, they came into a lighted chamber, a vast subterranean room illuminated by many torches. And here von Horst saw the nature of the creatures into whose hands he had fallen. They were of the same race as the man he had seen fleeing from the Xanth. They were mostly men, but there were a few women among them and perhaps a dozen children. All had white skins, white hair, and the pink and red eyes of albinos, which in themselves are not disgusting. It was the bestial, brutal faces of these creatures that made them appear so horrible. Most of the assemblage, which must have numbered several hundred people, sat or squatted or lay near the wall of the roughly circular chamber, leaving a large open space in the center. To this space von Horst was dragged, then he was thrown to the ground, his hands tied behind his back, and his ankles secured. As he lay on his side, taking in all that he could see of the repulsive concourse, his heart suddenly sank. From the mouth of a corridor opposite that through which he had been brought into the chamber he saw Laja being dragged. They brought her to the open space where he lay and bound her as they had bound him. The two lay facing one another. Von Horst tried to smile, but there was not much heart in it. From what he had seen of these people and what he had guessed of their customs, he could draw no slightest ray of hope that they might escape a fate similar to that of those whose ghastly remains they had seen in those other 2 chambers of the cave. "It looks like a hard winter," he said. "Winter? What is winter?" she asked. "It is the time of year." "Oh, but then you don't even know what a year is. What's the use? Let's talk about something else." "Why do we have to talk?" "I don't know why I have to, but I do. Ordinarily I'm not a very loquacious person, but right now I've got to talk or go crazy." "Be careful what you say, then," she whispered, "if you are thinking of talking of a way to escape." "Do you suppose these things can understand us?" he demanded. "Yes, we can understand you," said one of the creatures standing near them, in hollow, sepulchral tones. "Then tell us why you captured us. What are you going to do with us?" The fellow bared his yellowed teeth in a soundless laugh. "He asks what we are going to do with them," he announced in loud tones that were none the less suggestive of the grave because of their loudness. The audience rocked with silent mirth. "What are we going to do with them?" echoed several, and then they went off into gales of hideous, mirthless laughter that was as silent as the tomb. "If they want to know, let's show them now," suggested one. "Yes, Torp," said another. Now. "No," said he who had been addressed as Torp, the same fellow who had originally spoken to von Horst. "We already have plenty, many of which have aged too long as it is." He stepped closer to the prisoners, and, stooping, pinched their flesh, digging a filthy forefinger between their ribs. "They need fattening," he announced. "We shall feed them for a while. Plenty of nuts and a little fruit will put a layer of juicy fat on their ribs." He rubbed his palms together and licked his flabby lips. "Some of you take them away and put them in that little room over there, get nuts and fruit for them, and keep them there until they get fat. As he finished speaking, another of the creatures entered the room from one of the runways that led above. He was very much excited as he ran into the center of the cavern. "What's the matter with you, Durg?" demanded Torp. "I was chased by a Zareth," exclaimed Durg, "but that is not all. A strange gillick with a woman made many loud noises with a little black stick, and the Zareth fell down and died. The strange gillick saved Durg's life, but why, I do not know." The men who had gathered about Von Horst and Lodja to take them to the chamber in which they were to be fattened had removed the thongs from their ankles and dragged them to their feet just as Durg finished his story, so that he saw them now for the first time. "There they are," he exclaimed excitedly. "There is the same gillick that saved Durg's life. What are you going to do with them, Torp?" "They are going to be fattened," replied Torp. "They are too thin." "You should let them go, because they saved my life," urged Durg. "Should I let them go because the man is a fool?" demanded Torp. "If he had any sense he would have killed and eaten you. Take them away." "He saved a Gorbis," cried Durg, addressing the assembled tribe. "Should we let him be killed for that? I say, let them go free." "Let them go," cried a few, but there were more who shrieked, "Fatten them! Fatten them!" As the men were pushing them toward the entrance to the chamber in which they were to be confined, Von Horst saw Durg facing Torp angrily. "Some day I am going to kill you," threatened the former. "We need a good chief. You are no good." "I am chief," screamed Torp. "It is I who will kill you." "You?" demanded Durg with disgust. "You are only a killer of women. You murdered 7 of them. You never murdered a man." "I murdered 4. "You poisoned them," sneered Torp. "I did not," shrieked Durg. "I killed 3 of them with a cleaver and stabbed the other with a dagger." "In the back?" asked Torp. "No, not in the back, you woman killer." As Von Horst was pushed from the large cavern into the darkness of the small one that adjoined it, the 2 Gorbuses were still quarreling, and as the European meditated upon what he had heard, he was struck not so much by the gruesomeness of their words as by Durg's use of 2 English words, cleaver and dagger. This was sufficiently remarkable in itself, and even more so coming from the lips of a member of a tribe that was apparently so low in the scale of evolution that they had no weapons of any description. How could Durg know what a dagger was? How could he ever have heard of a cleaver? And where did he learn the English words for them? Von Horst could discover no explanation of the mystery. The Gorbuses left them in the smaller cave without bothering to secure their ankles again, though they left their hands tied behind them. There were leaves and grasses on the floor, and the 2 prisoners made themselves as comfortable as they could. The torchlight from the larger cave relieved the gloom of their prison cell, permitting them to see one another dimly as they sat on the musty bedding that littered the floor. "What are we going to do now?" demanded Lodja. "I don't know of anything that we can do right now," replied the man, "but it appears that later on we are going to be eaten, when we are fatter. If they feed us well we should do our best to get fat. We must certainly leave a good impression behind us when we go." "That is stupid," snapped the girl. "Your head must be very sick indeed to think of anything so stupid." "Perhaps thick would be a better word," laughed Von Horst. "Do you know, Lodja, it is just too bad." "What is too bad?" "That you have no sense of humor," he replied. "We could have a much better time if you had." "I never know when you are serious and when you are laughing with words," she said. "If you will tell me when the things you say are supposed to be funny, perhaps I can laugh at them." "You win, Lodja," the man assured her. "Win what?" she demanded. "My apology and my esteem. You have a sense of humor, even though you don't know it." "You said a moment ago," said Lodja, "that you didn't know of anything that we could do right now. Don't you wish to escape, or would you rather stay here and get eaten?" "Of course I'd prefer escaping," replied Von Horst, "but I don't see any possibility of it at present while all those creatures are in the big cave." "What have you got that thing you call pistol for?" demanded Lodja, not without a note of derision. "You killed a Zareth with it. You could much more easily kill these Gorbuses, then we could escape easily." "There are too many of them, Lodja," he replied. "If I fired away all my ammunition, I could not possibly kill enough of them to make escape certain, furthermore my hands are tied behind me. But even were they free, I'd wait to the very last moment before attempting it. You have no way of knowing it, Lodja, but when I have used up all these shiny little things tucked in my belt, the pistol will be of no more use to me, for I can never get any more of them. Therefore, I must be very careful not to waste them. However, you may rest assured that before I'll let them eat either one of us, I'll do a little shooting. My hope is that they will be so surprised and frightened by the reports that they'll fall over one another in their efforts to escape." As he ceased speaking, a Gorbus entered their little cave. It was Durg. He carried a small torch which illuminated the interior, revealing the rough walls, the litter of leaves and grasses, the 2 figures lying uncomfortably with bound hands. Durg looked them over in silence for a moment, then he squatted on the floor near them. Torp is a stubborn fool, he said in his hollow voice. He ought to set you free, but he won't. He's made up his mind that we're going to eat you, and I guess we shall. It's too bad though. No one ever saved a Gorbus's life before, it was unheard of. If I had been chief, I would have let you go. Maybe you can help us anyway, suggested von Horst. How? Asked Durg. Show us how we can escape. You can't escape, Durg assured him emphatically. Those people don't stay in that other cave all the time, do they? Demanded the European. If they go away, Torp will leave a guard here to see that you don't get away. Von Horst mused for a moment. Finally he looked up at their grotesque visitor. You'd like to be chief, wouldn't you? He demanded. SSSH, cautioned Durg. Don't let anyone hear you say that. But how did you know? I know many things, replied von Horst in a whisper, mysteriously. Durg eyed him half fearfully. I knew that you were not as other Gilliks, he said. You are different. Perhaps you are from that other life, that other world, of which Gorbuses get fleeting glimpses out of the dim background of almost forgotten memories. Yes, they are forgotten, and yet there are always reminders of them constantly tormenting us. Tell me, who are you? From whence came you? I am called Von, and I come from the outer world, from a world very different from this one. I knew it, exclaimed Durg. It must be that there is another world. Once we Gorbuses lived in it. It was a happy world, but because of what we did we were sent away from it to live here in this dark forest, miserable and unhappy. I do not understand, said von Horst. You didn't come from my world, there is no one like you there. We were different there, said Durg. We all feel that we were different. To some the memories are more distinct than to others, but they are never wholly clear. We get fleeting glimpses that are blurred and dim and that fade quickly before we can decipher them or fix them definitely in our memories. It is only those that we murdered that we see clearly, we see them and the way that we murdered them, but we do not see ourselves as we were then, except rarely, and then the visions are only hazy suggestions. But we know that we were not as we are here. It is tantalizing, it drives us almost to madness, never quite to see, never quite to recall. I can see the 3 that I killed with the cleaver, my father and 2 older brothers. I did it that I might get something they had, I do not know what. They stood in my way. I murdered them. Now I am a naked Gorbus feeding on human bodies. Some of us think that thus we are punished. What do you know about cleavers? Asked von Horst, now much interested in the weird recital and its various implications. I know nothing of cleavers except that it was with a cleaver the first killed my father and my 2 brothers. With a dagger, I stabbed a man. I do not know why. I can see him, his pain-distorted features clearly, the rest of him very vaguely. He had on blue clothes with shiny buttons. Ah, now he has faded away, all but his face. He is glaring at me. I almost had something then, clothes, buttons. What are they? I almost knew, now they are gone. What were the words? What words did I just say? They have gone, too. It is ever thus. We are plagued by half-pictures that are snatched away from us immediately. You all suffer thus? Asked von Horst. Yes, said Durg. We all see those we have murdered, those are the only memories that we retain permanently. You are all murderers? Yes. I am one of the best. Torp's 7 women are nothing. Some he killed while they were embracing him with love, he smothered them or choked them. One he strangled with her own hair. He is always bragging about that one. Why did he kill them? Demanded Laja. He wished something that they had. It was thus with all of us. I can't imagine what it was I wished when I killed my father and brothers, nor what any of the others wished. Whatever it was, we didn't get it, for we have nothing here. The only thing we ever crave is food, and we have plenty of that. Anyway, no one would kill for food. It gives no satisfaction. It is nauseating. We eat because if we didn't we believe that we would die and go to a worse place than this. We are afraid of that. You don't enjoy eating? Asked von Horst. What do you enjoy? Nothing. There is no happiness in the forest of death. There are cold and hopelessness and nausea and fear. Oh, yes, there is hate. We hate one another. Perhaps we get some satisfaction from that, but not a great deal. We are all hating, and you can't get a great deal of pleasure doing what everyone else is doing. I derived a little pleasure from wishing to set you free, that was different, that was unique. It is the first pleasure I have ever had. Of course I am not certain just what pleasure is, but I thought I recognized the sensation as pleasure because while I was experiencing it I forgot all about cold and hopelessness and nausea and fear. Anything that makes one forget must be a pleasure. You are all murderers? Asked Laja. We have each killed something, replied Durg. Do you see that old woman sitting over there with her face in her hands? She killed the happiness of 2 people. She remembers it quite clearly. A man and a woman. They loved each other very much. All that they asked was to be left alone and allowed to be happy. And that man standing just beyond her. He killed something more beautiful than life. Love. He killed his wife's love. Yes, each of us has killed something, but I am glad that it was men that I killed and not happiness or love. Perhaps you are right, said von Horst. There are far too many men in the world but not half enough happiness or love. A sudden commotion in the outer cave interrupted further conversation. Dirk jumped to his feet and left them, and von Horst and Lodja, looking out, saw 2 prisoners being dragged into the cavern. More food for the larder, remarked the man. And they don't even enjoy eating it, said Lodja. I wonder if what Dirk told us is true, about the murders, I mean, and the other life they half recall. Von Horst shook his head. I don't know, but if it is, it answers a question that has been bothering generations of men of the outer crust. Look, said Lodja. They are bringing the prisoners this way. To the fattening pen, said von Horst with a grin. One of them is a very big man, is he not? Remarked Lawantaya. It takes many Gorbases to force him along. That fellow looks familiar to me, said von Horst. Not the big one, the other. There are so many Gorbases around them that I can't get a good look at either of them. The new prisoners were brought to the smaller cave and thrust in roughly, so that they almost fell upon the 2 already there. The larger man was blustering and threatening, the other whined and complained. In the semi-darkness of the interior it was impossible to distinguish the features of either. They paid no attention to von Horst or Lodja, although they must have been aware of their presence, yet the former felt certain that the loud bragging of the larger man must be for the purpose of impressing them, as the Gorbases had departed, and the fellow's companion did not appear to be the type that anyone would wish to impress. He was quite evidently a coward and in a blue funk of terror. He was almost gibbering with fright as he bemoaned the fate that had ever brought him to the forest of death, but the other man paid no attention to him, each rambling on quite independently of the other. As von Horst, half amused, listened to them, several Gorbases approached the cave, bearing fruits and nuts. One of them carried a torch, the light from which illuminated the interior of the cave as the fellow entered, and in the flickering light, the faces of the prisoners were revealed to each other. You, fairly screamed the big fellow who had been blustering, as his eyes fell upon von Horst. It was Frug, and his companion was Scruff. 11. Fatten for slaughter. As the full significance of the situation revealed itself to von Horst, he was of 2 minds as to whether he should laugh or curse. Their predicament had been bad enough before, but with the presence of these 2 it might be infinitely worse. Frug's reaction when he recognized them augured no good. However, if the situation was menacing it was also amusing, and von Horst smiled as he contemplated the excitement of the massive caveman. And the girl, too, exclaimed Scruff. Yes, said von Horst, it is indeed we. To what do we owe the pleasure of this unexpected visit? We had thought of you as being safely beside the home fires of Busty cooking your meat, and here you are waiting to be cooked as someone else's meat. Ah, but is not life filled with surprises? Some pleasurable, some, not so pleasurable. If I could break these bonds and get my hands on you, shouted Frug. Yes? What would you do then, my man? Inquired von Horst. I'd break your neck, I'd pound your face to a pulp, Weit, becked von Horst. Permit me to suggest a different order of procedure. If you were to break my neck first, as you intimate is your intention, you would derive little pleasure from beating my face to a pulp, as I should be dead and therefore unable to appreciate what you were doing to me. Really, Frug, you are not very bright. I cannot conceive how a person of such limited intelligence ever came to be chosen chief of Busty, but perhaps you were chosen because of the circumference of your biceps rather than for that of your cranium. The Gorbases had dumped a quantity of fruit and nuts upon the floor of the cave and departed, leaving the cavern again in semi-darkness. Frug was still struggling with his bonds. Scruff was whimpering and moaning. Von Horst was contemplating the food. We can negotiate the softer fruit with our hands tied behind us, he remarked to Lodja, but how do they expect us to crack the shells of some of those nuts? Perhaps we can free our hands, suggested the girl. Roll over close to me, with your back against mine, then try to untie the thongs that bind my wrists. If you can free me, I can easily free you. She had spoken in a low whisper lest Frug or Scruff hear and act upon the suggestion before she and von Horst were free. The European wriggled his body into position behind that of the girl, then he fell to work upon the knots at her wrists. It was a slow process, partially because he could not see what he was doing and partially because of the limited use he had of his hands, but after what seemed an eternity he felt a knot loosening. With practice he became more adept, and soon the second knot gave to his perseverance. There were several more, but eventually the last one succumbed, and Lodja's hands were free. Immediately she rolled over, facing his back, and he could feel her nimble fingers searching out the secret of the. He wished something that they had. It was thus with all of us. I can't imagine what it was I wished when I killed my father and brothers, nor what any of the others wished. Whatever it was, we didn't get it, for we have nothing here. The only thing we ever crave is food, and we have plenty of that. Anyway, no one would kill for food. It gives no satisfaction. It is nauseating. We eat because if we didn't we believe that we would die and go to a worse place than this. We are afraid of that. You don't enjoy eating? Asked von Horst. What do you enjoy? Nothing. There is no happiness in the forest of death. There are cold and hopelessness and nausea and fear. Oh, yes, there is hate. We hate one another. Perhaps we get some satisfaction from that, but not a great deal. We are all hating, and you can't get a great deal of pleasure doing what everyone else is doing. I derived a little pleasure from wishing to set you free. That was different, that was unique. It is the first pleasure I have ever had. Of course I am not certain just what pleasure is, but I thought I recognized the sensation as pleasure because while I was experiencing it I forgot all about cold and hopelessness and nausea and fear. Anything that makes one forget must be a pleasure. You are all murderers? Asked Lajah. We have each killed something, replied Durg. Do you see that old woman sitting over there with her face in her hands? She killed the happiness of two people. She remembers it quite clearly. A man and a woman. They loved each other very much. All that they asked was to be left alone and allowed to be happy. And that man standing just beyond her. He killed something more beautiful than life. Love. He killed his wife's love. Yes, each of us has killed something, but I am glad that it was men that I killed and not happiness or love. Perhaps you are right, said von Horst. There are far too many men in the world but not half enough happiness or love. A sudden commotion in the outer cave interrupted further conversation. Durg jumped to his feet and left them, and von Horst and Lajah, looking out, saw two prisoners being dragged into the cavern. More food for the larder, remarked the man. And they don't even enjoy eating it, said Lajah. I wonder if what Durg told us is true, about the murders, I mean, and the other life they half recall. Von Horst shook his head. I don't know, but if it is, it answers a question that has been bothering generations of men of the outer crust. Look, said Lajah. They are bringing the prisoners this way. To the fattening pen, said von Horst with a grin. One of them is a very big man, is he not? Remarked Lawantaya. It takes many Gorbases to force him along. That fellow looks familiar to me, said von Horst. Not the big one, the other. There are so many Gorbases around them that I can't get a good look at either of them. The new prisoners were brought to the smaller cave and thrust in roughly, so that they almost fell upon the two already there. The larger man was blustering and threatening, the other whined and complained. In the semi-darkness of the interior it was impossible to distinguish the features of either. They paid no attention to von Horst or Lajah although they must have been aware of their presence, yet the former felt certain that the loud bragging of the larger man must be for the purpose of impressing them, as the Gorbases had departed, and the fellow's companion did not appear to be the type that anyone would wish to impress. He was quite evidently a coward and in a blue funk of terror. He was almost gibbering with fright as he bemoaned the fate that had ever brought him to the forest of death, but the other man paid no attention to him, each rambling on quite independently of the other. As von Horst, half amused, listened to them, several Gorbases approached the cave, bearing fruits and nuts. One of them carried a torch, the light from which illuminated the interior of the cave as the fellow entered, and in the flickering light, the faces of the prisoners were revealed to each other. You, fairly screamed the big fellow who had been blustering, as his eyes fell upon von Horst. It was Frug, and his companion was Scruff. 11. Fatten for slaughter. As the full significance of the situation revealed itself to von Horst, he was of two minds as to whether he should laugh or curse. Their predicament had been bad enough before, but with the presence of these two it might be infinitely worse. Frug's reaction when he recognized them augured no good. However, if the situation was menacing it was also amusing, and von Horst smiled as he contemplated the excitement of the massive caveman. And the girl, too, exclaimed Scruff. Yes, said von Horst, it is indeed we. To what do we owe the pleasure of this unexpected visit? We had thought of you as being safely beside the home fires of Busty cooking your meat, and here you are waiting to be cooked as someone else's meat. Ah, but is not life filled with surprises? Some pleasurable, some, not so pleasurable. If I could break these bonds and get my hands on you, shouted Frug. Yes? What would you do then, my man? Inquired von Horst. I'd break your neck, I'd pound your face to a pulp, Weit, becked von Horst. Permit me to suggest a different order of procedure. If you were to break my neck first, as you intimate is your intention, you would derive little pleasure from beating my face to a pulp, as I should be dead and therefore unable to appreciate what you were doing to me. Really, Frug, you are not very bright. I cannot conceive how a person of such limited intelligence ever came to be chosen chief of Basti, but perhaps you were chosen because of the circumference of your biceps rather than for that of your cranium. The Gorbuses had dumped a quantity of fruit and nuts upon the floor of the cave and departed, leaving the cavern again in semi-darkness. Frug was still struggling with his bonds. Scruff was whimpering and moaning. Von Horst was contemplating the food. "We can negotiate the softer fruit with our hands tied behind us," he remarked to Lodja, "but how do they expect us to crack the shells of some of those nuts?" "Perhaps we can free our hands," suggested the girl. "Roll over close to me, with your back against mine, then try to untie the thongs that bind my wrists. If you can free me, I can easily free you." She had spoken in a low whisper lest Frug or Scruff hear and act upon the suggestion before she and Von Horst were free. The European wriggled his body into position behind that of the girl, then he fell to work upon the knots at her wrists. It was a slow process, partially because he could not see what he was doing and partially because of the limited use he had of his hands, but after what seemed an eternity he felt a knot loosening. With practice he became more adept, and soon the second knot gave to his perseverance. There were several more, but eventually the last one succumbed, and Lodja's hands were free. Immediately she rolled over, facing his back, and he could feel her nimble fingers searching out the secret of the 12 mammoth men. From the foot of the cliff where the cave lay, the plain stretched away knee-deep in lush grasses, and from his position above, Von Horst saw where a new trail had been recently trampled toward the left. That was the direction which Frug had said he and Scruff would take to avoid the forest of death on their return to Basti. The grass was not trampled out across the plain in the direction of Lohar, there was just the one plain trail toward the left, a trail that would be easy to follow as long as it ran through the deep grass. Von Horst wished that he knew how long he had slept, so that he might have some idea of the start the abductors had, for he was certain that they were abductors. It was inconceivable that Lodja would have accompanied them back to Basti voluntarily. The trail appeared quite plain from above, but when he reached the foot of the cliff he saw that it was not so apparent. A close examination showed that only the grasses that had been actually crushed and broken by the passage of the three remained down to mark the trail, all others had returned to their normal positions. It was this discovery that gave Von Horst greatest concern, as it seemed to indicate that the two men and the girl were far ahead of him. At the foot of the cliff there were some indications of a struggle. The grasses here had been crushed and broken over a considerable area. The man could visualize what had taken place. Lodja had tried to break away from her captors and had probably put up a good fight, but finally she had been overcome and carried away. He stood looking along that dim trail that led away into a new unknown. It led away from Sari, to what unknown dangers he could not even guess. Should he follow it? And for what? There was little likelihood that he could overtake the three, and if they reached Basti, none that he could rescue the girl. Why should he wish to risk his life in an attempt to save her, an attempt that was almost certain to fail? She disliked him. She had not taken even decent precautions to hide the fact. And if he did rescue her it would be only to be killed by her savage fellow tribesmen for his pains. He thought of Gaz, the terrible man who crushed lives out with his bare hands. Were he to turn in the opposite direction he might skirt that end of the forest and pick up Dangar's trail. The thought of Dangar and the pleasurable anticipation of the friendly welcome awaiting him in Sari filled him with longing. He desired companionship, he longed to feel the warmth of a friend's hand again, to see the light of a friendly smile. He was tired of indifference, and enmity, and hatred. With a sigh, he turned back and followed the dim trail toward the left. Off there somewhere in the distance was a little figure with a wealth of golden hair, perhaps an ignis fatuus luring him to his doom. "I wonder why I do it," he said half aloud, and then he shrugged his shoulders and swung on into the unknown. Profiting by past experience and the schooling he had received from Dangar, he kept in mind constantly the necessity of directing his steps so that he would never be too far from some haven of safety were he threatened by any of the savage creatures that haunt the Pellucidarian scene. Trees were the prime factor in his defensive strategy. Never before had trees loomed so large in his consciousness, and all too often did he have to seek sanctuary among their branches. Now it would be a huge cave lion that drove him to shelter, again a mighty tarag, or some fearsome reptile of a forgotten age. Along the route that he followed he found the places that Frug and Scruff and Lodja had slept, and here he slept, too. For food he had the eggs of birds and reptiles, fruits that grew upon some of the trees or bushes along his route, and various edible tubers that Dangar or Lodja had taught him to find and recognize. He made fire as had his primitive progenitors who trod the outer crust with the boss and the cave bear, and he took the time to fashion a new bow and arrows that he might have meat without wasting his precious ammunition. A sturdy spear he fashioned, too, its tip fire-hardened as were the tips of his arrows. He tried to make up for the time thus lost by pushing on throughout the endless day until utter exhaustion forced him to halt for sleep. Often, between his own sleeps, he passed one and sometimes two of the sleeping places of those he pursued, and this assurance that he was gaining on them heartened him and spurred him on, yet there were times when his quest seemed utterly hopeless and discouragement sat heavily upon him. The great forest seemed to run on interminably, but at last it ended at the foot of a transverse range of rough hills. Here he had difficulty in following the trail, for the ground was no longer carpeted with tall grass but was oftentimes hard and stony. Beyond the hills stretched another rolling plain through which wound a large river. He viewed it first from the summit of the pass that he had followed through the hills along an ancient trail worn deep by the feet of men and beasts through countless ages. There was a fringe of forest along the river and little patches of wood scattered about the plain which stretched away to his right to merge in the distance with what seemed the blue of an ocean. Ahead of him, far away, another forest bounded the plain upon that side, while to his left the hills curved around to meet the forest in the distance. Game dotted the landscape as far as the eye could reach. In the nearer foreground he could distinguish bos and red deer, antelopes, tapirs, sheep, and several species of herbivorous dinosaurs, while at the edge of the forest skirting the river he made out the huge forms of mammoths and giant sloths. It was a scene of such primitive beauty and interest that von Horst stood spellbound for several minutes, fascinated by its loveliness. For the moment he forgot everything but the scene below him, but presently his empty belly recalled him to the realities of life, so that it was no aesthete that crept silently down toward the plain, but a primitive hunter of the Stone Age. He followed the stream when he reached the foot of the hills, taking advantage of the cover offered by the trees that bordered it. He thought that he might get a sheep, several of which were grazing close to the fringing trees, but he knew how wary they were and how difficult to stalk. The river wound in great loops, and to save time he took short cuts across the low hillocks which the river skirted in its wide bends like a great serpent gliding smoothly toward the sea. While he was below the summits of the hillocks he could not see the sheep, nor they him, yet he moved always cautiously since he never knew what dangers might confront him upon the hillocks' opposite slopes, for the country was game-filled, and where the herbivores are, there also are the flesh-eaters. As he topped one little hill he saw that which brought him to a sudden halt, a great, hairy mammoth lying upon its side moaning. It lay upon a small level flat beside the river at which was evidently a watering place or a ford, and not its moaning alone proclaimed that it was suffering but the agonized trembling of its huge bulk as well. Notwithstanding the fact that von Horst knew that these mighty beasts might be highly dangerous, there was ordinarily such a sweet placidity in their appearance and such a suggestion of dependability and intelligence in their great bulk and dignified mien that he was wont to be lulled into a feeling of security in their presence, and there had been aroused within him a considerable fondness and respect for these shaggy progenitors of the modern elephant. To see one suffering thus filled him with compassion, and though his better judgment warned him against it, he could not resist the urge to approach more closely and investigate, though what he might accomplish was doubtless scarcely more than a nebulous conjecture in his mind. As he came closer the small eyes of the pachyderm discovered him, and it raised its head and trumpeted angrily, but it made no effort to rise. Thus assured that it was helpless, von Horst came close and examined it, and as he did so he discovered numerous sharp-pointed splinters of bamboo protruding an inch or so above the surface of the mud, in which the beast lay at the river's edge, so that he had to move with great care to avoid stepping on them. Almost immediately he saw the cause of the beast's helplessness and suffering. Several of these splinters were embedded in the sole of each great pad, so that the creature could not stand without suffering extreme agony. It was evident that the sharp stakes had been planted by men, and the purpose of them was quite apparent, for how more easily could men of the old Stone Age, with their primitive weapons, bring down the giant mammoth and render it helpless that they might dispatch it in safety? The presence of the stakes suggested the proximity of men, and von Horst had already had sufficient evidence to convince him that all men in the savage world were enemies. Yet, though he looked carefully in all directions, he saw no sign that any were about. Then he turned his attention once more to the beast and its predicament. If he could remove the splinters and permit the mammoth to arise, what might he expect from the pain-racked creature? Von Horst ran his fingers through his hair dubiously. Then the beast moaned again, and so piteously that the man, casting discretion to the winds, decided to do what he could to assuage its suffering. As he started to pick his way among the splinters closer to those huge pads, he realized that the beast would only be impaled upon others the moment it arose after he had removed those that it had already collected, so he set to work to pick the sharpened stakes from the ground over the entire area that they covered, a strip about 20 feet wide across the trail leading to the river, and as he worked, the eyes of the mammoth were on him constantly, watching his every move. As he worked near the great beast's head he noticed a patch of white hair the width of a man's hand growing down the side of the animal's cheek. He had seen many mammoths, but he had never seen one similarly marked. It gave the beast a strange, patriarchal expression, as though he wore an enormous white sideburn. Von Horst noted the strange marking casually as he went about his work, but his principal interest was centered on speculation as to what the gigantic beast would do when it was able to rise. Some of the stakes were planted within reach of the mighty trunk, but the man gathered these, as he did the others, apparently unconcerned by the risk he took. And always the little eyes watched his every move, but whether in sullen hate or wary curiosity he could not guess. At length came the time when all the stakes that he could locate had been removed, and the next were those embedded in the great pads. Without a moment's hesitation Von Horst walked to the hind feet of the pachyderm and, one by one, drew out the torturing slivers. Then he moved to the front feet, well within reach of the sinuous trunk and the great, curving tusks. Methodically, he commenced to remove the slivers from the four pads, the powerful trunk weaving above him like a huge serpent. He felt it touch him, the moist tip of it gliding over his naked body. It encircled him, but he paid no attention to it. He had invited death by a humane gesture, and he was game. The trunk wrapped about his torso, gently, almost caressingly. It did not tighten, it did not interfere with his work, yet he sensed it might close instantly at the slightest false move on his part. Death seemed very close. When he had removed the last sliver he stood slowly erect. For a moment he waited, then, very gently, he laid hold of the trunk and sought to push it from him. There was no resistance. He moved unhurriedly, with great deliberation, yet he was under high nervous strain. At last he stood free and moved slowly away. He did not stop, but continued on along the river in the direction he had been going when he discovered the mammoth. For a moment he was obsessed by a powerful urge to run, to put as much distance between himself and the beast as he could before it regained its feet, but he did not. Instead, he moved on slowly, nonchalantly, casting an occasional glance behind him. The beast lay quiet for a moment, then slowly it commenced to raise its bulk from the ground. Tentatively, it tried bearing its weight on its front feet, and it stood thus for a moment, then it rose and stood with all 4 feet on the ground. It took a few steps. Evidently its feet did not pain it greatly. It raised its trunk and trumpeted, then it moved off on the trail of the man. At first, Von Horst argued to himself that it was not following him and that presently it would turn aside and go about its own affairs, but it did not. It came steadily after him at a speed considerably in excess of that at which Von Horst was walking. The man shrugged resignedly. What a sentimental fool he had been. He might have known that this savage beast could not feel gratitude. He should have left it alone or put it out of its misery with a single well-placed bullet. Now it was too late. Presently it would overtake him and toss him. Such were his thoughts as he walked slowly along the trail. Overtake him it did. The sinuous trunk wrapped suddenly about him and he was lifted from the ground. This, thought Von Horst, is the end. The mammoth stopped and passed him back to its right side where it placed him on the ground, but it still let its trunk rest lightly about him, holding him facing its side, and what Von Horst saw there awoke within him a realization of the sagacity of the animal, for this side, upon which it had lain, was thickly studded with bamboo slivers such as he had plucked from his feet. It wished the man to remove them as he had removed those others. Von Horst breathed a sigh of relief as he set about his work, and when it was completed he once again moved on along the trail he had been following. From the tail of an eye he saw the mammoth swing about in its tracks and depart in the opposite direction. In a few moments it was lost to sight. The man felt that he was well out of a nasty situation that what he described to himself as maudlin sentimentality had gotten him into. But now that it was well over and he had seen the last of the great beast he was glad that he had gone to its aid. His hunger, momentarily forgotten, manifested itself once more as he started to stalk the sheep again. From the summit of a rise he saw them, and again he was the primitive huntsman of the Pleistocene. Only a cartridge belt and a .45 differentiated him in appearance from his progenitors of the Stone Age. From the next rise of ground that he mounted he saw the sheep again, much closer now, but he saw something else, far to the right across the river. At first glance he thought it only a herd of mammoths moving down a gently sloping plain from the foothills, coming toward the river, but instantly he recognized the truth. Astride the neck of each of the great beasts rode a man. The sight recalled to his memory Thorek, the mammoth man of Ja'Ru. These, indeed, must be mammoth men, perhaps the country to which he had wandered was Ja'Ru. However, the fact that he had been on friendly terms with Thorek induced no illusions as to the reception he might expect from the savage tribesmen of his erstwhile companion in slavery. Discretion counseled him to keep out of sight, and so he moved cautiously down the hill toward a clump of trees that grew beside the river, where, concealed from their view, he could still watch the approach of the company. As he reached the trees he saw the embers of a camp fire still glowing, and his heart leaped in his bosom, for he knew that he was now close on the trail of Lajah and her abductors. Which way had they gone from here? They could not be far, for no matter how much the timelessness of Pellucidar might deceive the mind of man, it could not befuddle the laws of combustion. Fire would consume wood as quickly and embers would remain hot as long here as upon the outer crust and no longer. He hastily examined the ground about the campsite. For the moment the mammoth men were forgotten in contemplation of the nearness of Lajah and the surge of rage against Frug and Scruff, now almost within reach of his vengeance. He loosened the gun in its holster. He would give no quarter, but would shoot them down as he would a couple of mad dogs, nor was there a question of doubt as to the rightness of his contemplated act. So easily does man slough the thin veneer of inhibitions with which civilization conceals but does not eradicate primal instincts and characteristics of mankind. There were no laws here for him other than those he made himself. His search revealed the footsteps of those he sought in the soft earth at the river's edge. He recognized them all, the imprints of the great, splay feet of the men, those of Lajah, small and perfect. They led to the river and did not return. By that he knew that they had crossed. He looked in that direction and saw the mammoth men steadily approaching. They were much nearer now, the long, swinging strides of the mammoths covering ground rapidly. Trees and bushes grew upon the far bank of the river, grew in isolated clumps as though planted by the hand of some master landscape gardener. Between two such clusters of bushes he could still see the mammoth men, but he could see to no great distance either to the right or left. He wished to cross the river in pursuit of those he sought, but he did not wish to attract the attention of the mammoth men to him. Cautiously he moved downstream until a clump of bushes on the opposite bank hid him from the view of the approaching warriors. Then, careless of the possible presence of dangerous reptiles, he plunged into the stream, which was neither wide nor swift. A few powerful strokes carried him to the opposite bank, where he again sought the trail of the trio. Nor did he have far to search, for he found it almost immediately leading out toward the plain where the mammoth men rode. To follow immediately would be to reveal his presence to the approaching warriors, who could not fail to see him should he expose himself now, as they were not over a quarter of a mile away. They had changed their course slightly and were moving upstream more nearly parallel with the course of the river. Presently they would pass him, and he would be free to continue his search for Lajah. As he waited, he stood partially concealed behind a bush, only a little of his face showing. Thus he watched the mammoth men. They were moving steadily upon their course, like soldiers of any age upon the march, the monotony of which lulls even exuberant spirits into quiescence. But suddenly there was a change. A rider looking toward the river suddenly halted his mount and shouted to his fellows, pointing back downstream at something evidently some distance below the point where von Horst was hiding. Simultaneously he started in the direction he had pointed, urging his lumbering mount into a swifter gait, and after him trooped the remainder of the company. Savage, primitive to the degree was the sight of that warlike company to von Horst, extinct men upon extinct mounts, animated monuments of savage might. The European was thrilled, and, too, his curiosity was aroused. What had the warrior seen? What were they approaching or pursuing? Risking discovery, von Horst moved stealthily around the end of the bush that had concealed him, until he could look down the valley in the direction the mammoth men were riding. At first he saw nothing. A tiny hillock, scarcely more than a mound, shut off his view. Assured that the attention of the riders was riveted upon whatever quarry lay ahead of them and that they would not notice him, von Horst crept forward to the mound and up its side until he could see beyond its summit. What he saw brought his heart into his mouth. 13. Captured. Von Horst sprang from his concealment and ran out into the open, and as he did so he reached for his gun, but his holster was empty. There was no time to go back and search for the weapon. He recalled loosening it in its holster before he plunged into the river, and now he assumed that it had fallen out at that time. It was a tragic loss, but there was nothing that he could do about it, and that which he saw before him tended to crowd all other considerations into the background. Running toward the river from out upon the plain and pursued now by the mammoth men were three figures which he instantly recognized as Lajah and her abductors. The trees that dotted both sides of the river grew closer together just ahead and formed a little forest toward which the three were running. Scruff had seized Lajah by a hand and was dragging her along, while Frug brought up the rear. Although Lajah was running, it was evident that she was attempting to break loose from Scruff, and Frug was striking at her with a heavy switch in an effort to goad her to greater speed. It seemed certain that they would reach the forest ahead of the mammoth men if nothing delayed them, though by a small margin. Perhaps then they might escape, yet Lajah was trying to delay them. Her only reason, as far as von Horst could imagine, was that she would prefer to be the captive of the mammoth men than to remain a prisoner of the bastions. Uppermost in von Horst's mind was the desire to reach the great brute that was striking the girl. Never before in his life had the instinct to kill an enemy so overwhelmingly mastered him. He even forgot the menace of the advancing mammoth men in the heat of his hate and bloodlust. He came diagonally upon the three from the side and a little to the rear, but so engrossed were they with one another and their flight that they did not see him until he was almost upon them and had shouted a curt command to Frug to stop striking the girl. A new fear was added to the terror already reflected in Scruff's eyes, a new hope leaped to Lajah's, a glad cry to her lips as she voiced the one word, Vaughn. What a wealth of relief and hope were expressed in that single monosyllable. Surprise and rage were in Frug's snarled recognition as he vouchsafed his reply and registered his contempt for the man by striking again at Lajah. And then, just at the edge of the wood, Von Horst leaped for him, leaped for his throat, and the two went down, rolling on the flower-starred turf in what each hoped was a duel to the death. Both men were powerful, but Frug outweighed his antagonist by 30 pounds, an advantage that, however, was offset by Von Horst's agility and skill. All that was in the mind of either was to kill the other, everything else was forgotten. Each fought for a hold upon the other's throat, each struck terrific blows at the other's face. The caveman grunted and cursed, Von Horst fought in silence. And thus the mammoth men came upon them, surrounding them. A dozen leaped from their huge mounts and fell upon the two. These, too, were mighty men. They dragged the combatants apart and made them prisoners. It was then that Von Horst had an opportunity to look around for Lajah. She was nowhere in sight, neither was Scruff. The chief of the mammoth men was looking for them, too, and when he saw that they were missing he sent a party of his men across the river in search of them. The remainder mounted the mammoths after having two of the great beasts swing Von Horst and Frug to their heads in front of their riders. Then, without waiting for the party that had gone in search of Lajah and Scruff, they set off again in the direction they had been going at the time the discovery of the three had interrupted their march. The mammoth men appeared very sure of themselves, so much so that they did not even bind their prisoners' hands, which was the equivalent of saying that escape was impossible, nor did Von Horst doubt but that such was the case. The leader and some of the others questioned him. They asked him his name, from what country he came, where he was going. They were gruff, unfriendly men, and it was easy to see that they hated all strangers. So accustomed was Von Horst to this characteristic of Pellucidarians that he made no effort to assure them that he was friendly, reasoning, and rightly, that it would have been a waste of energy and breath. As they moved on up the river they presently discovered a huge mammoth ahead of them. It was in the open, so that they could not stalk it, but evidently they particularly wished it. "It is he," said one. "I would know him as far as I could see him." "The trap did not get him," commented the leader. "He is too wise to be fooled by traps." "What good would he be if we did catch him?" demanded another. "He is an ugly customer. Already he has killed 10 men that we know of who hunted him. He could never be trained now, he is too old." "Mammoth wishes him," said the leader. "That is enough, Mammoth is chief. He will use him in the little canyon. He will give us great sport." The great beast had been moving off across the plain when they first saw him. Now he turned and faced them, a huge creature, larger than any of those the mammoth men rode. "It's he all right," said the warrior, upon whose mount Von Horst rode, "it's Era, Ma Rana." It was then that Von Horst first noticed the great patch of white hair on the animal's left jowl. Era, Ma Rana, Old White, the killer, he mused. The killer. He realized now how foolhardy he had been in approaching the beast at all. The fact that he had not been killed suggested that the huge creature was not only endowed with great intelligence but with a well-developed sense of gratitude. Only thus could he account for his being still alive. The leader of the band issued some instructions, and the party spread out and started to circle Old White, which remained facing them, making no effort to escape. "Trog's going to try to drive him," remarked the warrior with Von Horst. "If he can bring in Era he will be a great man." "Can he?" asked Von Horst. The warrior shrugged. "The sun-bleached bones of 10 warriors are a better answer than any living tongue can offer." Slowly the warriors drew around behind Era in a half-circle, then they closed and moved forward. In the meantime the quarry had turned again to face them. His little eyes gleamed, his trunk weaved slowly to and fro as he rocked his head from side to side. The warriors commenced to shout and wave their spears. They came closer. It seemed incredible that the animal did not turn and break for freedom, but it did not. Era stood his ground. Suddenly he raised his trunk and, with a loud scream, charged. Straight for the center of the line he came, a solid line, for the mammoths were touching side to side. He lowered his head, and when he struck, 2 mammoths were knocked down. As he passed over them he seized one of the riders and hurled him 50 feet, then as he passed over him, he trampled him. After that he appeared to pay no more attention to the party, but moved on majestically in the direction he had been going before the interruption. It seemed to Von Horst that his whole manner screamed contempt for the man-things that had dared to delay him. Trog shook his head ruefully and turned toward the river. The 2 felled mammoths came to their feet, One of them was riderless, but he followed on with the others. No one paid any attention to the mangled warrior lying on the plain. Perhaps he was dead, but he may not have been. It was evident to von Horst that these men held human life lightly and that they were without compassion. He wondered if Thorek would recall that he had suggested that they be friends should they meet again, for it was possible that he might meet him now that he was a prisoner of Thorek's fellows. Prompted by this recollection of the man who had escaped from the bastions with him, he turned toward the warrior riding behind him. "Do you know Thorek?" he asked. "Yes, what do you know of him?" "We are friends." The warrior laughed. "No stranger is friend to a mammoth man," he said. "Did Thorek return from Busti?" asked von Horst. "No," and then suddenly, "What is your name?" "Fon." "If Thorek were here he would tell you that we are friends." "Well, perhaps Thorek was your friend, but no other mammoth man will be. Friendship for a stranger is weakness in a warrior. Strangers are to be killed, that is why they are strangers. If there were no strangers there would be no one to kill except one another, and that would not be good for the tribe. We would soon kill each other off. Men must fight and kill, it is the lifeblood of warriors." Presently they came to the river and crossed it, keeping slightly above the regular ford. Then Trog and some of the others dismounted and examined the ground in the trail leading into the river. Von Horst watched them with amusement, for he recognized the spot well. He saw that the men were surprised and angry at what they discovered. "Era has been down here," exclaimed Trog. "There is blood here, but where are the stakes? They have all been removed. I saw mud and blood on the right side of Era as he passed close to me when he charged through our line," volunteered a warrior. "Yes, he was down here," growled Trog. "We had him, but how could he have escaped?" "He is very old and very wise," said one. "He could never be old enough or wise enough to pick the splinters from his pads and his side, to pick them all out of the ground," remonstrated Trog. "That could only be done by a man." "Here are the footprints of a man," exclaimed a warrior. "But who would dare approach Era and take the splinters from him? Had a man done that we should find his body close by?" Trog shook his head. "I do not understand." They found the splinters where von Horst had tossed them aside, and they set them out again with great care and well concealed upon the opposite side of the river. Then they mounted and rode back toward the hills from which they had been coming when von Horst first sighted them. "We'll get him yet," remarked von Horst's warrior. "How?" asked the European. "When he gets splinters in his feet the pain is so great that he cannot stand. The pads of a tander are thick, but they are very sensitive. When we come back and find him down we put heavy thongs of mammoth hide about his neck. These are fastened to 3 mammoths on each side of him, mammoths trained for this work. Then we take the splinters from the ground around him and from his pads and let him get up. After that it is easy. The 6 mammoths drag him until he tires of being choked. After that he will follow quietly." "Will you ever be able to train Era, provided you get him?" asked von Horst. The warrior shook his head. "He would never be safe. Mammoth will put him in the little canyon, and he will afford us much amusement." "In what way?" The warrior looked at von Horst and grinned. "I think you will find out soon enough," he said. After the party reached the foothills it followed a well-worn trail that led up to a wide plateau upon which several mighty canyons debouched from the mountains beyond. The plateau was covered with lush grasses and was crossed by several streams that issued from the mouths of the canyons, into one of which Trog led his savage troop. The grandeur of the scenery within the canyon was impressive, and to such an extent that for the moment von Horst almost forgot the hopelessness of his situation. Within its narrow mouth the canyon widened into a lovely valley walled by precipitous cliffs that were broken occasionally by the narrow mouths of smaller canyons. A stream flowed through the bed of the canyon, trees and flowering shrubs grew in profusion, fish leaped in the river, and birds of weird, prehistoric shapes and coloration flew from tree to tree. Von Hochzeit. What a lovely place, he thought, if only Laja and I were here alone. Lawantaya. What had become of her? Had she escaped from Scruff, or was she still his captive? She would have been better off here among the mammoth men, or at least no worse off, for no one could have been more repugnant to her than Scruff. At least, were she here, she would have had one friend whom she might trust even though he were unable to do anything for her. Von Hochzeit. He had a premonition that he would never again see Laja, and it suddenly occurred to him that this strange world was going to be a very much more terrible place to live in because of that. He realized that something had gone out of his life that nothing could replace. Perhaps it hurt his pride to admit it even to himself, for the girl had certainly given him sufficient proof on numerous occasions that he meant nothing whatever to her, yet he could not forget the pathetic longing note in her voice when she had recognized him and called to him just before the mammoth men had separated them forever. Depressed by this sad reverie, his future fate seemed to mean nothing to him. He did not care what the mammoth men did to him. The sooner it was over, the better. Without a single companion for whom he cared, he might as well be dead as alive, for there was no chance that he might ever return to the outer world, nor little more that he would find sorry should he escape from his present predicament. While he was occupied by these unhappy thoughts, the troop turned into one of the smaller canyons, and shortly thereafter he saw the caves of the Mammoth Men pitting the lace of the lofty cliff ahead. A considerable number of men, women, and children were on the ground at the foot of the cliff where a grove of trees offered shelter from the noonday sun. Some of the women busied themselves around cooking fires, others were fashioning sandals or loin cloths. Men chipped laboriously at stone weapons in the making, scraped spear shafts into shape, or merely loafed at ease. At sight of the returning troop, they quit whatever had been occupying them and clustered about to inspect the prisoners and exchange gossip with the arriving warriors. Trog looked very important. "Where is Mamth?" he demanded. "He is in his cave, sleeping," said a woman. "Go and awaken him," commanded Trog. "Go yourself," replied the woman, "I do not wish to be killed." Trog, who, with the other warriors of his party, had dismounted, was standing near the woman, and at her refusal he swung his spear quickly and felled her with the haft, knocking her unconscious. Then he turned to another woman. "Go and awaken Mamth," he said. The woman laughed in his face. "Guva has no man," she said, "but I have. You will not knock me down with your spear. You would not have knocked Guva down if she had had one. Go and awaken Mamth yourself." "I am not afraid of your man," blustered Trog. "Then why don't you knock me down?" taunted the woman, "for I am not going to awaken Mamth." The crowd gathered about commenced to laugh at Trog, adding to his discomfiture and his rage. He stood there, red in the face, swinging his spear to and fro and looking from one to another of them. "What are you looking for?" demanded the woman. "Widows and orphans." "You will pay for this," growled Trog, then his eyes alighted on von Horst. "Go and awaken Mamth," he commanded. The European grinned. "Where is he?" he asked. Trog pointed to a cave entrance part way up the cliff. "He is in there," he growled. "Get along with you." He swung his spear, striking at von Horst. The prisoner dodged, and seizing the weapon wrenched it from Trog's grasp, then he broke it across his knee and flung it on the ground at the Mammoth Man's feet. "I am neither a woman nor a child," he said, and, turning, started toward the cliff and Mamth's cave, in his ears the shouts and laughter of the tribesmen. "I kill," shouted Trog, and started after him, drawing his stone knife. Von Horst wheeled and waited the mad charge of the Mammoth Man. Trog approached him at a run, brandishing his knife above his shoulder. When he struck, von Horst seized his wrist, turned quickly, stooped low and, drawing the man's arm across his shoulder, hurled him over his head and heavily to the ground. Then he continued on his way to the foot of the cliff and up the rude ladders that led to Mamth's cave. Glancing back over his shoulder he saw Trog still lying where he had fallen, apparently insensible, while the crowd laughed uproariously, evidencing to von Horst that his act had not prejudiced them against him and, also, that Trog did not appear to be overly popular. He wondered just how popular he himself would be with Mamth when he awakened him, for he had gathered from what he had just heard that Mamth did not relish being awakened from his sleep, and he had seen just how primitive these people were and how little control they had of their tempers, like primitive people everywhere, even those who were supposed to be civilized and yet had primitive minds. When at last he came to the mouth of the cave he looked in, but he could see nothing, because of the darkness of the interior. He shouted Mamth's name in a loud voice and waited. There was no response. The laughter below had ceased. The watchers were waiting in tense expectancy the result of his temerity. Von Horst shouted again, this time more loudly, and this time there was a response, a bull-like bellow and the sound of movement within. Then a perfect mountain of a man emerged from the cave, his hair disheveled, his beard awry, his eyes sleep-bleared and bloodshot. When he saw von Horst he stopped in amazement. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Why did you awaken Mamth? Do you wish to be killed?" "I am a prisoner," replied von Horst. "Trog sent me to awaken you because he was afraid to do it himself, and as for being killed, that is probably what I was taken prisoner for." "Trog sent you, did he?" demanded Mamth. "Where is he?" Von Horst pointed toward the foot of the cliff where Trog still lay. Mamth looked down. "What is the matter with him?" "He tried to kill me with a dagger," explained the prisoner. "And you killed him?" "I don't think so. He is probably merely stunned." "What did he wish of me?" "He wished to show you the two prisoners he brought in. I am one of them." "He disturbed my sleep for that," grumbled Mamth. "Now I cannot get to sleep again." He pointed to the ladder. "Go down." Von Horst did as he was bid, and Mamth followed him. When they reached the ground Trog was regaining consciousness. Mamth went and stood over him. "So ho," he exclaimed. "So you were afraid to come and awaken Mamth, but you sent a prisoner who might have sneaked into the cave and killed Mamth in his sleep. You are a fool." And you let the prisoner knock the wits from your head. You are a fine one to be sub-chief. What happened? He must have hit me over the head with a big rock when I wasn't looking, said Trog. He did not, cried a woman. Trog was going to hit the prisoner with his spear. The prisoner took Trog's spear from him and broke it in two. There it lies. Then Trog tried to kill the prisoner with his knife. The prisoner picked Trog up and threw him over his head. A number of them commenced to laugh as the woman recalled the events, but they did not laugh so loudly in the presence of Mamth. The chief looked searchingly at von Horst. So you broke Trog's spear and then threw him over your head, he exclaimed. Where is the other prisoner? Here, said one of the warriors guarding Frug. Mamth looked at the bastion. He is even bigger than the other, he said. They should furnish us good sport in the little canyon. Take them away. Gorf, take this one to your cave and see that he does not escape. He jerked a thumb toward von Horst. Truth, you take charge of the other. Have them ready when Mamth wishes them. Trog, you are no longer a sub-chief. Mamth will appoint a better man. 14. He dies. Gorf was a short, stocky, middle-aged man with a wealth of whiskers and small, close-set eyes. Von Horst judged him a mean customer even before the fellow gave any indication of his true nature, which he was not long in doing, for as soon as Mamth indicated that he was to take over the prisoner he stepped up to von Horst, seized him roughly by the shoulder and gave him a push toward the foot of the cliff and the nearest ladder. Get along, he growled, and be quick about it. Then, without other reason than pure brutality, he prodded his prisoner in the back with the point of his spear, a vicious jab that brought blood. Resentment and rage flared in the breast of the man from the outer crust, the sudden pain goading him to instant action. He wheeled and crouched. Gorf, sensing attack, jabbed at him again with his spear, but von Horst pushed the weapon aside and leaped close, pinioning the mammoth man's head beneath his right arm. Then he commenced to spin, faster and faster. Gorf's feet left the ground, his body whirled, almost horizontal, in a flattening circle. Von Horst released his hold and sent the fellow spinning to the ground. Mamth broke into a loud guffaw, which was echoed by the other spectators. Gorf staggered dizzily to his feet, but before he was fully erect von Horst clamped the same hold upon him, and once again whirled and threw him. When Gorf arose this time, dizzy and befuddled, the other was standing over him. His fists were clenched, an arm was back ready to deliver a blow to the bewhiskered chin that would have put the mammoth man out for good, but then his rage left him as suddenly as it had come. The next time you try anything like that on me, Gorf, I'll kill you, he said. Pick up your spear and go along. I'll follow. He had given no thought as to what the reaction of the other mammoth men might be to his attack upon one of their fellows, nor had he cared, but their laughter assured him that they had enjoyed the discomfiture of Gorf, as they would probably enjoy the discomfiture of any creature. Gorf stood for a moment, hesitant. He heard the laughter and the taunts of his fellows. He was trembling with rage, but he looked at the man who had bested him, standing there waiting to best him again, and his courage proved unequal to his anger. He stepped over to retrieve his spear, and as he passed von Horst he spoke in a low tone of voice. I'll kill you yet, he said. The European shrugged and followed him. Gorf walked to a ladder and started to ascend. See that nothing happens to him, Gorf, shouted Mamth. He'll be a good one for the little canyon. You see, remarked von Horst, that between Mamth and me it'll be best for your health that you treat me well. Gorf mumbled in his beard as he climbed to the third tier of caves, von Horst following him upward. Here the mammoth man followed the wide ledge to the right and stopped before a large entrance in which squatted 3 women. One was middle-aged, the other 2 much younger. Of these, she who appeared to be the elder was short and squat like Gorf, an unprepossessing girl with a sinister countenance. Their only clothing was scanty loincloths. Who is that? Demanded the woman. Another mouth to feed, grumbled Gorf, one of the prisoners that Trog brought in. We keep him and guard him, but if he falls off the cliff it will not be my fault. The elder of the 2 girls grinned. He might, she said. The man walked to the younger girl and kicked her. Get me food, he growled, and be quick about it. The girl winced and scurried into the cave. Gorf squatted beside the other 2 women. The elder was fashioning a pair of sandals with soles of mammoth hide, the other just sat staring vacantly at nothing. Gorf eyed her, scowling. How much longer shall I have to hunt for you, Grum? Demanded Gorf. Why don't you get a man? Won't any of them have you? Shut up, growled Grum. If they won't have me it's because I look like you, because I am like you. If you'd been a woman you'd never have had a mate. I hate you. Gorf leaned over and struck her in the face. Get out of here, he cried, go get yourself a man. Leave her alone, said the older woman wearily. Keep out of this, warned Gorf, or I'll kick your ribs in. The woman sighed. That is all that Mumel does, sneered Grum. She just sits and sighs, she and that monkey-faced Lotai. Sometimes I could kill them both. You are a bad daughter, said Mumel. The time that I bore you was a bad time indeed. Get out, growled Gorf. I told you to get out. He pointed a stubby finger at Grum. Try to put me out, snapped the girl. I'd scratch out your eyes. Get me a man. If you were any good you'd get men for both your daughters. You're a coward. You're afraid to fight men for us. If I ever made a man marry you he'd sneak up behind me in the woods the first chance he got and kill me. I'd help him, said Grum. Lotai, bellowed Gorf. Where is the food? Coming, called the girl from the interior of the cave, and a moment later she came with a handful of dried meat. She tossed it on the ground in front of Gorf and backed away to the far corner of the entrance, where she sat in huddled misery. Gorf attacked the meat like a ravenous wolf, breaking off great hunks between his powerful teeth and swallowing them whole. Water, he snapped, when he had finished. The girl called Lotai arose and hurried back into the cave. A moment later she returned with a gourd which she handed to Gorf. That is all, she said, there is no more water. Gorf gulped it down and arose. I am going to sleep now, he said. I'll kill anyone who awakens me. Mumel, you and Grum go for water. Lotai, watch the prisoner. If he tries to escape, scream, and I'll come out and what? Inquired von Horst. Do as I told you, said Gorf to the women, ignoring von Horst's query, then he lumbered into the cave. The two older women followed him, returning shortly each with a large gourd, then they descended the ladders on their way for water. Von Horst looked at the young girl who had been left to guard him. Now that the others had gone the strained expression that had clouded her face had disappeared, and she was more beautiful than before. Happy family, he remarked. She looked at him questioningly. Do you think so? She asked. Perhaps the others are happy, though they do not seem so. I know that I am not. Once again von Horst was faced with the literal-mindedness of the Stone Age. He was reminded of Laja. I was only laughing with words, he explained. Oh, she said, I see. You do not really think that we are happy? Is it always like this? He demanded. Sometimes it is worse, but when Mumel and I are alone, we are happy. Grum hates me because I am pretty and she is not. Gorf hates everyone. I think he even hates himself. It is strange that you have no mate, said von Horst, you are very good-looking. No man will take me because he would have to take Grum, too, if Gorf insisted. That is a law of the Mammoth Men. You see, she is older than I, and should have a man first. What did Grum mean when she said that Gorf was afraid to fight men for you? If we picked out men that we wanted they would have to take us if Gorf fought them and won, but I would not wish a man that way. I would wish my man to want me so much that he would fight to get me. And that is the only way that Grum could get a mate? Asked von Horst. Yes, because she has no brother to fight for her, nor any friend to do it for her. You mean that any man who would fight for her could get her a mate? Why, yes, but who would do it? A friend might, he said, or any man who wanted you badly enough. She shook her head. It is not so easy as that. If a man who was not her father or brother fought for her and lost, he would have to take her. And Grum has made it even worse by choosing Horg as the man she wishes to mate with. No one could defeat Horg. He is the biggest and strongest man in the tribe. Rather a precarious method of getting a mate, mused von Horst. If your man is vanquished, you get him, but you may get a corpse. No, she explained. They fight with bare hands until one of them gives up. Sometimes they are badly hurt, but seldom is anyone killed. They sat in silence for a while, the girl watching the man intently. Von Horst was thinking of Laja and wondering what fate had befallen her. He was sad in the knowledge that she had passed out of his life forever, the haughty, imperious little slave girl who hated him. He wondered if she really did hate him. There were times when he doubted that she did. He shook his head. Who could ever understand a woman? Lotai stirred. What is your name? She asked. Von, he replied. I think you are a very nice man, she said. Thank you. I think you are a very nice girl. You are not like any man I have ever seen before. I think you are a man that I would trust. You would never beat me. You would always be kind, and you would talk to me as men talk to men. That is something our men never do. At first, maybe, they are nice, but soon they only speak to give orders or to scold. Oh, some of them are not so bad as others, she added. I think that Gorf, my father, is the worst. He is very bad. He never says a pleasant word to any of us, and he is worse with me than with the others. He beats me and kicks me. I think that he hates me. But that is all right, because I hate him. There was one very nice man. I liked him, but he went away and never came back. He must be dead. He was a big man and a great warrior, but he was kind to women and children, and he laughed and was pleasant. The women would all have liked him for a mate, but he never would take a mate to live always in his cave. Thorek was different that way. Torek, exclaimed von Host. He did not come back to Jiaoyu? You know him, asked Lotai. We were prisoners of the bastions, and we escaped together. We were friends. He should have been here before this. Since we parted I have traveled far and slept many times. Something must have happened to him. The girl sighed. He was such a nice man, but then, what difference does it make? He was not for me. I will get a mate like Gorf and be kicked and beaten the rest of my life. The women of Jiaoyu have a hard time of it, I should say, remarked von Horst. Not all of them. Only those like Mummel and myself. Some of them are big and strong and like to fight. If they are kicked, they kick back. These have a happy time. Mummel and I are different. She is not of Jiaoyu. Gorf stole her from another tribe. I am like her, and Grum is like Gorf. We would run away and go back to my mother's country, but it is very far, and the dangers are great. We would be killed long before we got to Sari. Zari, mused von Host. That is the country that Dangar came from. That is where I should like to go when I escape from here. You will never escape, said Lotai. You will go into the little canyon, and you will never come out. What is this little canyon I have heard so much about? Demanded the man. You will find out soon enough. Here come Mummel and Grum with the water. We must not talk together too much in front of Grum and Gorf. If they thought that I was friendly with a prisoner they would kick me and beat me all the more. The two women came into view up the ladder from below, each balancing a heavy gourd of water on her head. Mummel looked tired and dejected. Grum was hot and irritable, her evil face twisted in a black frown. She paused in the entrance to the cave. I am going to sleep, she said. See that you don't make any noise. Then she entered the cave. Mummel stooped and stroked Lotai's hair as she passed. I too am going to sleep, little one, she said. I should like to sleep myself, remarked Lotai after the others had entered the cave. Why don't you? Asked von Horst. I have to watch you. I'll promise not to go away while you are guarding me, he assured her. Go in and sleep. I'd like to myself. She looked at him intently for a long time before she spoke. I believe that you would not try to escape if you told me you would not, she said, but if Gorf found you out here while I was asleep in the cave it would be just as bad for me as though you had escaped. If you will go in though and not come out while I am sleeping it will be safe. We can go into a far corner of the cave and sleep, and then they won't bother us. Von Horst was very tired, and he must have slept a long time. When he awoke, Lotai was not there. He found her with the others on the ledge before the cave. They were eating jerked venison, washing it down with great draughts of water. Gorf and Grum ate noisily, like beasts. No one offered von Horst food. It lay in a little pile on a piece of skin in which it had been wrapped, filthy-looking and malodorous, but it was food, and von Horst was famished. He walked over to it where it lay close to Gorf, and stooped to take some. As he did so Gorf struck his hand away. This fine food is not for slaves, he growled. Go to the back of the cave and get the scraps and the bones that are there. From the vile odor that he had noticed in the cave, von Horst could surmise the nature of the food that was intended for him, food that only actual starvation could drive him to eat. He knew that his future life with these people, however short or however long it might be, would depend largely upon the attitude that he took at this time. He reached again for the food, and again Gorf struck at his hand, but this time von Horst seized the fellow's wrist, jerked him to his feet, and struck him a heavy blow on the jaw. Gorf dropped in his tracks. Von Horst gathered up a handful of the venison, picked up a gourd of water and crossed to the opposite side of the entrance where Mummel and Lotai sat wide-eyed and trembling. There he sat down and commenced to eat. Grum had not spoken, and now she sat with her eyes upon von Horst, but what was passing in the dark convolutions of that savage brain none might guess. Was she filled with rage that a stranger had struck down her father? Was she selfishly resentful that he had taken food? Or was she secretly admiring his courage, strength, and skill? Presently consciousness returned to Gorf. He opened his eyes and raised himself on one elbow. He looked puzzled and was evidently trying to gather the threads of what had transpired. He stared at von Horst and the venison he was eating. Presently B rubbed his jaw, feeling of it gingerly as though to discover if it were broken, then he fell to eating. During all that had transpired no one had spoken, but von Horst was satisfied. He knew that he would not again be denied food and needed no verbal assurance of the fact. The endless Pellucidarian day dragged on. Von Horst ate and slept. Gorf hunted, sometimes returning with the carcass of a kill or cuts from those he had hunted with companions, sometimes empty-handed. Von Horst saw parties of mammoth men come and go on their huge mounts. He talked with Lotai and with Mummel. Occasionally Grum joined in the conversations, but more often she sat in silence staring at von Horst. The man wondered what his fate was to be and when he would know. The timelessness of Pellucidar offered no standard for the measurement of duration. It was this fact, he judged, that made the Pellucidarian seem so often to be dilatory. Immediately, here might encompass the passage of an hour or a day of the outer crust solar time or, conceivably, a much longer period. Perhaps Mamth thought that he was handling the fate of the two prisoners with dispatch, but to von Horst it seemed an eternity. He had never seen Frug since they had been separated at the foot of the cliff, and if he never saw him again it would be far too soon. On one occasion von Horst was sitting on the ledge before the entrance to the cave thinking of Lajah, as he often did, and wondering if she still lived. He was alone, for Gorf was hunting, Mumel and Lotai had gone up the canyon for a potato-like tuber, and Grum was asleep in the cave. He was enjoying the solitude, free from the scolding and cruelty of the family when either Grum or Gorf were present. He was daydreaming, recalling pleasant memories, conjuring the faces and figures of friends of bygone days, friends that he would never see again, but the thought did not make him particularly sad. It was good to recall the happier events of the past. His reveries were interrupted by the shuffling of sandaled feet within the cave. Grum was awake. Presently she came out on the ledge. She stood looking at him intently for a moment. "You would make me a good mate," she said. "I want you." Von Horst Laukate. "What makes you think I would make a good mate?" he asked. "I saw the way you handled Gorf," she replied. "I was told what you did to Trog. I want you for my mate. But I am a stranger and a prisoner. I think I've heard one of you say that your women couldn't mate with the men of other tribes. I will see Mamth about that. Perhaps he would consent. You would make a good warrior for Mamth." Von Horst stretched comfortably and grinned. He felt quite safe. "Mamth would never give his consent," he said. "Then we will run away," announced Grum. "I am tired of living here, I hate them all." "You've got it all figured out, haven't you?" "I have. It is all settled," replied Grum. "But suppose I don't want you for a mate," he inquired. "It will be better than death," she reminded him. "If you stay here you will go to your death in the little canyon. We could not escape. If escape had been possible, I would have been gone long since. I have constantly watched for my chance." "We can escape," said Grum. "I know a way that you do not know of." "How about Horg?" he asked. "I thought you wanted Horg." "I do, but I can't get him." "If I helped you to get Horg, would you help me to escape?" he asked, as an idea suddenly developed in his mind. "How could you get Horg for me?" "I have an idea that I could. If we could go to Mamth together, and you asked him to let me be your mate, he would refuse, then I could explain the plan I have that would get Horg for you. I think he would like it." "Will you do it?" she demanded. "Will you help me escape?" "Yes," she promised. As they talked, von Horst saw a party of mammoth men returning to the village on their huge mounts. They came with shouts and laughter, like conquering warriors, and there was one among them riding double behind another warrior, who was surrounded by a great crowd of jabbering, gesticulating natives as soon as he dismounted. The man from the outer crust watched them with but little interest and only casual curiosity. He could not know the cause of their exultation. Shortly after the return of the warriors, von Horst noticed considerable activity in the grove at the foot of the cliff. Cooking fires were being built on the ground, which was unusual, as most of the cooking was done by individual families on the ledges before their caves. "There is going to be a karoo," said Grum. "We shall all go down and have much to eat and drink." "What is a karoo?" he asked. It was a word he had not heard before. Grum explained that it was a feast and celebration in honor of some noteworthy event, in which all of the members of the tribe joined. She did not know the reason for this karoo, but judged that it was to celebrate something important that the returning party had accomplished. "We can't go down until Gorf returns or Mamth sends for us," she said, "because my orders are to remain here and watch you, but when Gorf comes he will take you down, as otherwise one of us would have to remain here with you and miss the celebration. You are a nuisance. I wish you were dead." "Then you wouldn't get Horg," he reminded her. "I won't get him anyway. There is nothing that you can do to get him for me. I'll have to take you instead, but you're not the man that Horg is. Wait until you see him. Compared with you he is as the Tander is to the Thag, and, besides, he has a mighty beard. His face is not as yours, smooth like a woman's. Always you are scraping off your beard with the strange, shiny knife that you carry." Presently Lotai and Mumel returned to the cave, to be followed shortly by Gorf. The man carried the carcass of an antelope he had killed, the women, a supply of tubers, and after they had deposited these things in the cave Gorf ordered them all to descend to the ground. Here there was a considerable gathering, several hundred men, women, and children, comprising von Horst concluded, the entire membership of the tribe. There was much talking and laughing, a holiday spirit seemed to possess the gathering, making a strange contrast to their usual demeanor. The strange warrior was still surrounded by such a large crowd that von Horst did not catch a glimpse of him at first. Little attention was paid to the prisoners as Frug squatted disconsolately with his back to the bole of a tree, while Von Horst stood watching with interest the largest concourse of really primitive people that he had ever seen. Presently Mamth discovered him. "Come here," he shouted, then he turned to the warrior who seemed the center of attraction. "Here's a prisoner such as no man ever saw before. Take a look at him. He has a face as smooth as a woman's and yellow hair." He tossed Trog and Gorf around as though they were babies. "Come here you," he again commanded Von Horst. As the prisoner approached, the warrior pushed his way through the crowd to see him, and a moment later they stood face to face. "Torek," exclaimed Von Horst. Well, roared the mammoth man. "It is Von or I'm a Jalak. So this is the man who tossed Trog and Gorf around? I am not surprised. I can toss either of them, and he tossed me." "You know him?" demanded Mamth. "Know him? We are friends. Together we escaped from Busty, taking the slaves with us." "Friends," exclaimed Mamth. "He is a stranger. Mammoth men do not make friends of strangers." "I did, and he made a good friend," retorted Thorek. "Because of that he should have the friendship of all mammoth men. He is a great warrior, and should be allowed to live with us and take a mate from among our women, or he should be permitted to go his way unmolested." The heavy visage of Mamth was furrowed by a black scowl. "No," he shouted. "He is a stranger and an enemy, and he dies as should all the enemies of the mammoth men. Mamth has been saving him for the little canyon. When Mamth is ready, he goes there. Mamth has spoken." 15. The bridegroom. The sentence of death had been pronounced, but Von Horst was not shocked, because he was not surprised. He had known all along that death in some form would end his captivity if he did not escape. When it would come, in this timeless world, could not be even a matter of conjecture. Thorek was angry, but he could do nothing to save his friend, because Mamth was chief and his word law. He sulked and grumbled beneath his breath, but when the feast started he fell to with the rest and soon apparently forgot his grievance in enjoyment of food and drink. Von Horst and Frug were permitted to join in the celebration, and after a taste of the brew that was being served, Von Horst concluded that it would not require much of it to cause a man to forget more than a grievance. It was fermented by the women, a mixture of wild maize, several herbs, and honey, and while far from unpalatable it had the kick of an army mule. One taste sufficed for Von Horst. Both men and women partook of it freely with varying results. Some became more loquacious and hilarious, others morose and quarrelsome, so that there was usually a fight progressing in some part of the grove. There were some who did not drink at all, and Von Horst noticed that Lotai and Mumel were among these. Grum, on the contrary, was evidently a two-fisted drinker, and while she carried it well, it accentuated her distinctive characteristics, so that she became more bellicose, domineering, and assertive. Von Horst watched her not without some amusement, as she approached an enormous man and threw her arms about his neck, revealing a characteristic that it had taken several potent draughts to coax to the surface. Grum evidencing affection bordered upon the ludicrous. Evidently the large man felt the same way about it, for he roughly disengaged her arms from about his neck and gave her a violent push that sent her sprawling on the ground. She was up in an instant, a veritable fury, her face distorted with rage. Von Horst thought that she was going to attack the ungallant one, but instead she barged down on Mamth. "I want a mate," she screamed. "I want Horg." Mamth turned toward the big man. "What does Horg say?" he demanded. So that was Horg. Von Horst appraised the fellow and was glad that he had not elected to fight him for the sake of the delectable Grum. The man was a giant. He must have weighed close to 300 pounds, and he bulged with muscles. Horg guffawed loudly. "Take that Sheetarag as a mate," he bellowed. "I'd as soon take a Mahar." "You heard him," said Mamth. "Go back to the Karoo and leave the man alone. He is not for you." "He is for me," screamed Grum. "I have a warrior who will fight Horg for me." Every eye sought Gorf, and a great laugh followed. "Come on, Gorf," a warrior shouted, "show us how you will best Horg, but don't kill him." Horg laughed uproariously. "Come on, Gorf," he cried. "If you beat me I'll take Grum off your hands, and I don't blame you for wanting to be rid of her." "She's drunk too much tumul," growled Gorf. "I never promised to fight Horg for her. Horg is my friend, I do not wish to harm him." This elicited another roar of laughter, and Horg thought that it was so funny that he rolled on the ground bellowing his amusement. Grum said nothing. She just watched Horg and Gorf in silence for a moment, then she turned to Mamth. "I didn't say that Gorf was going to fight Horg for me. Gorf is a coward. He would fight nothing if he could get out of it. I have a man who will fight Horg, and do it now." "Who is he?" demanded Mamth. Von Horst experienced a distinct sinking feeling around the pit of his stomach. He knew what was coming. Grum pointed a stubby, grimy finger at him. "There he is," she cried in a loud voice. "He's not a mammoth man," objected Mamth. How can he fight for you? Because no one else will, admitted Grum. Mammoth shook his head, but he did not have time to voice a definite refusal before Horg spoke up. Let him fight me, he said. This is a Karoo, and we should have some amusement. You will promise not to kill him, demanded Mammoth. I am saving him for the Little Canyon. I will not kill him, promised Horg. Von Horst approached the two. And when I have beaten you, he demanded, you will make Grum your mate? That is the way of the Mammoth men, said Mammoth. He will have to take her, but you will not beat him. Beat me, bellowed Horg. Let me get hold of him. How do we fight? Asked Von Horst. Are there any rules? You fight as the beasts fight, explained Mammoth. You may use no weapon, no stone, nor stick. You fight until one of you is unable to fight longer or gives up. I am ready, said Von Horst. Are you ready, Horg? Demanded Mammoth. Horg laughed nonchalantly and contemptuously. I am ready, he said. Then fight, commanded Mammoth. The spectators formed a circle about the combatants as the two approached one another. Horg was in fine spirits. The tumult he had drunk accounted partially for that, and certainty of an easy victory took care of the rest. He cracked jokes with his friends at the expense of both Von Horst and Grum. They were rather broad jokes and not at all of the parlor variety, but every one enjoyed them immensely, that is, everyone but Grum. She was furious. Wait until I get you, she screamed. You'll wish you'd never been born. Von Horst grinned as he featured the life that was in store for Horg should the Mammoth man lose. Death would be sweeter. Suddenly Horg made a rush at Von Horst, the brawny arms, the ham-like hands endeavoring to close upon him, but Von Horst stooped and dodged beneath them, then he wheeled and struck Horg on the jaw, a blow that staggered him. Before the Mammoth man could recover, he was struck again, and again his head rocked. Now he was furious. He cracked no more jokes. He bellowed like an angry elephant and charged again. Again Von Horst dodged him, and the great hulk went lumbering on a dozen paces before it could stop. When Horg turned he saw Von Horst charging him. This was what he wished. Now he could get hold of the fellow, and once he got hold of him he could crush him, break his bones if he wished unless he gave up. He stood waiting, his feet spread far apart, his arms open. Von Horst ran swiftly straight toward Horg. Just before he reached him he leaped into the air, flexed his knees, drawing his feet close to his body, and then with all his strength backed by the momentum of his charge he kicked Horg with both feet full in the face. The result was astonishing, especially to Horg. He turned a complete back somersault, landed on his head, and dropped face down in the dirt. Groggy and only half conscious, he staggered slowly to his feet. Von Horst was waiting for him. Have you had enough? He asked. He did not wish to punish the man further in the condition he was in. The crowd was yelling encouragement to him, and with the fickleness and cruelty of crowds was jeering at its fallen champion. Grum, seeing her hopes about to be realized, screamed at the top of her voice as she urged Von Horst to finish the almost helpless man, but Horg would not give in. Perhaps he heard Grum and preferred death. He lunged for his lighter antagonist, growling beast-like. I kill, he screamed. Thus was Von Horst compelled to continue, for he knew that Horg had uttered no idle threat. If the fellow could get those great paws on him, get one good hold, he would kill him. In both his hands he seized one of the outstretched wrists, swung quickly around, bent suddenly forward, and hurled the mighty man over his head, a trick of jujitsu far simpler than it appeared to the amazed onlookers. Horg fell heavily and lay still. Von Horst approached and stood over him. There were cries of, "Kill him! Kill him!" for the bloodlust of these primitive savages was aroused, stimulated perhaps by the tumult they had drunk. Von Horst turned to Mammoth. Have I won? He asked. The chief nodded. You have won, he said. The victor looked at Grum. Here is your mate, he said. Come and take him. The woman ran forward and fell upon the prostrate Horg, beating and kicking him. Von Horst turned away in disgust. The others, laughing, returned to the food and the tumult. Thorek came and slapped Von Horst on the back. I told them you were a great warrior, he exulted. You should know, said Von Horst with a grin. Come and join the Karoo, said Thorek. You have had nothing to eat or drink. That is not the way to make Karoo. Why should I make Karoo? Demanded Von Horst. I do not even know what is being celebrated. They have captured Old White, the killer. That is something to celebrate. There never was such a wise old mammoth, nor one as large. After the next sleep we shall start training him, and when he is trained Mammoth will ride him. He is a fit mammoth for a chief. I should like to see him trained, remarked Von Horst, for he thought it might be an interesting occasion if Old White objected, which he was sure that he would. I'll ask Mammoth if you can come, said Thorek. It will probably be after the next sleep. Everyone will wish to sleep after the Karoo. The two men talked for a while, exchanging experiences that had befallen them since they had separated. then Thorek wandered away to drink with his fellows, and von Horst sought out Lotai. Together they watched the celebration, which was by this time loud and boisterous. Fights were more numerous, the laughter deafening. Usually dignified old warriors were performing foolish antics and laughing uproariously at themselves. Many of the women were thick-tongued and bleary-eyed. As von Horst watched them, he was struck by the very obvious fact that human nature had undergone little or no change from the Stone Age to the present time. Except for the difference in language and apparel, these might be people from any present-day country of the outer crust. Presently he saw Grum approaching unsteadily. For the moment she had relaxed surveillance over her new mate. Von Horst attracted her attention and beckoned to her. "What do you want?" she demanded. "You have not forgotten our bargain?" inquired the man. "What bargain?" she asked. "If I got Horg for you, you were to help me escape. When they are asleep after the Karu, I will show you the way, but you cannot go now. The Terrigs would get you. After the prisoners are taken to the little canyon, the Terrigs will be gone, then you could go." "It will be too late then," he said, "for I am to go to the little canyon, and if I have surmised correctly from what I have heard, I shall not return." "No," she admitted with a shrug, "you will not. But I promise to show you how you might escape. It is the only way I know. If you can't use it, that is not my fault." Then she staggered away in search of Horg, and von Horst returned to Lotai. The celebration dragged on, interminably, it seemed to von Horst, but at last those who could still walk reeled to their caves to sleep. Horg had drunk himself into a stupor, and Grum was beating him over the head with a stick in an effort either to punish or arouse him, perhaps to kill him. Von Horst could not guess which. Lotai, Mummel, and Gorf were climbing to their caves, the last so befuddled that climbing the ladder toward his ledge seemed to von Horst almost to verge upon suicide. The European passed close to Grum. "They are all going to their caves to sleep," he whispered. "Now is your chance to tell me. Go to the ledge before Gorfa's cave, and wait there for me." As he climbed the ladders toward the ledge, he could hear Grum berating Horg as she beat him, and he smiled as he speculated on the similarity between the people of the Old Stone Age and those of modern-day civilization. The principal difference seemed to lie in the matter of inhibitions. He had known women of the outer crust who were like Grum, their thoughts were taloned. He sat down upon the ledge to wait. He was quite alone. The others had gone into the cave to sleep. He thought of Lotai and the sad lives that she and Mummel led. He thought too of Laja, and these thoughts were sad thoughts. It seemed strange that this little savage should have won to such a place in his life that a future without her loomed dull and gray. Could it be that he loved her? He sought to analyze his feelings that he might refute such a theory, but he only arrived at another sigh with the realization that no matter what logic he brought to bear, the fact remained that her passing from his life had left an emptiness that hurt. Presently Grum came. Her little eyes were bloodshot, her frowsy hair at its frowsiest. She was the personification of a stench, both morally and physically. "Well," she said, "I guess Horg knows that he has a mate." "Why did you beat him?" asked von Horst. "You've got to start right with them," she explained. "If you give them the least little toehold you're lost, just as Mummel is." He nodded in understanding of her philosophy, for, again, he had known women of the outer crust who were like her. Perhaps their technique was more refined, but their aim was identical. Marriage to them meant a struggle for supremacy. It was a 50-50 proposition of their own devising. They took 50 and demanded the other 50. "Now," he said, "tell me how I may escape." "There is a hole in the rear of Gorfa's cave," explained Grum. "It drops down a few feet into a tunnel. When I was a little girl, Gorf was beating me. I broke away and hid in this hole. I knew he would not dare to follow me, because he had always told us that this tunnel led to the Molop Az. Gorf chased me and tried to get hold of me, reaching into the hole to seize me, so I had to move back into the tunnel to escape him. He threatened to kill me when I came out, if I didn't fall into the Molop Az and get burned up. I was very much afraid of Gorf then when I was a little girl. When this happened, he had been drinking too much Tummel, and I knew that if I came out he really would kill me, so I determined to stay where I was until I thought he was asleep. Then I got to thinking about Molop Az. Perhaps I could go far enough in the tunnel to see it and return safely. After all, it didn't make much difference to me if I did fall into it. Gorf was very cruel, and sooner or later he was sure to kill me. Of that I was convinced, so I thought I might as well take a chance with the Molop Az. Being young, I was very curious. The more I thought about it, the more I wished to investigate it. I decided to follow the tunnel and see the Molop Az. "What is the Molop Az?" asked von Horst. "It is a sea of fire, Pellucidar floats upon it. We know that, because there are places in Pellucidar where the smoke and fire come up through the ground from the Molop Az. There are holes in mountains where melted rock flows up. The dead that are buried in the ground are taken down bit by little demons and burned up in Molop Az. There is no doubt about that, because when we dig up a body that has been buried we find that some of it has been carried away, perhaps all of it. And did you find the Molop Az? She shook her head. No. The tunnel does not lead to Molop Az, it leads to the Little Canyon. From there, except at certain times, you could easily make your escape from Jaru. Just go up the canyon and climb the cliff at the upper end. Beyond, you can drop down into another canyon that leads out of our country into a country where mammoth men seldom if ever go. Thanks, said von Horst. But you can't go now. The Terrigs would get you. They are in the far end of the tunnel. They will be there until the prisoners are taken to the Little Canyon. What is the Little Canyon? He asked. She looked at him in surprise. What would a little canyon be but a little canyon? She demanded. What happens there? You will find out soon enough. Now I am going back to Horg. You got him for me, and I have kept my promise. I don't know whether he was worth the trouble, but at least I shall have a cave of my own. She turned then and left him. At least I shall have a cave of my own, von Horst grinned. Evidently it was an immemorial custom that girls should wed to escape their families.